morning, everyone, and welcome to the ModelOps 2021 Summit. My name is Catherine King, and I'm the director for the Big Data team here at Crinium, and it is a pleasure to have you joining us today. Now, before we jump into today's brilliant sessions, I'd like to draw your attention to a few items of housekeeping. Please do remember that you can submit your questions, and we strongly encourage that you do to our speakers using the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. And please do remember to share your thoughts on the content and interact with your fellow attendees as well. For any technical queries, please try refreshing your browser. If that doesn't quite do the trick, please head over to the help desk under your account settings within the event platform. Now, with all of that said and done, it's my absolute joy to introduce you to our first speaker of the day. Now, joining us live is Eric Brethenow, who's the VP and Analyst and AI Research Agenda Lead from Gartner. So, Eric, I can see you smiling away there. So, over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling from. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Eric Brethenow. I lead the AI agenda for Gartner, and I do also, as my accent does not indicate, live in Chicago. So I would like to welcome to the session. Today, we're going to talk about AI engineering. And AI engineering is actually one of these trends that is becoming critical for a very large portion of our clients worldwide. About 90% of my clients, regardless of their industry, where they're coming from, their geography, even their experience with AI techniques, most of them are telling us, again, more than 90%, we still have a very difficult time to move from prototype to production. So that AI engineering part of what we are looking at is to try to help in moving us toward that production level that is going to help us in a few years to come to finally be able to reap the benefits out of the multiple investments we've made in AI techniques. At Gartner, we made a prediction of throughout 2023, at least 50% of IT leaders will struggle to move their AI predictive projects from proof of concept to production maturity. Even in the next year and a half, 2 years, we're still going to have an issue. We are trying the best we can. I'm sure all our colleagues across the industry, our competitors as well, are making sure that we're trying to make that systematic, but it's still going to be a struggle as we move forward. It is a struggle for a very simple reason. And that simple reason has been existing since machine learning has existed as well. The thing is that the code that we produce, the machine learning code, the models that we produce, are actually critical for the systems that we are writing for, right? They are becoming one of the gems within the system that really makes it smarter, better, more appropriate, better recommendations, better fraud detections. It's becoming a critical part of that entire system, but it remains a very small part of that bigger ecosystem. It's a small part, maybe just in line of codes, but not in impact and not in maintenance. To be able to get to that code, to make sure the models are being taken care of, to make sure that we can actually monitor them, manage them, govern them, all of this takes a disproportionate amount of time and effort to make sure that while that very small piece of code within that larger ecosystem can live and survive, we still have a lot of way to go. This was part of a paper published by Google in 2014, the technical debt of machine learning. And still today, still true. We still are facing the same issues as we move forward. Yep, we have democratized the development of all that code. Yes, we're providing a lot more open source capabilities to do this for developing the models, but operationalizing the models, that's a lot more complicated and different. In 2018, when we released one of our first surveys on machine learning explicitly and asked the audience how much of those models that you do produce are fully deployed inside your operations. In 2018, and remember, keep in mind that we interviewed people that were readily familiar, that have had a lot of experience with AI techniques and machine learning in particular. So when you ask them the question, 47% told us that only less than half of what they have done has been really fully deployed. Last year, we asked the same question. We barely moved above the midline in 2 years. Now, also keep in mind all the advances we've done, all the progress we've made, all the tools we have at our disposal. Despite all of this, only 6% have moved up in order to tell us, well, now little more than half of what we do, we spend so much time on, is really seeing the light of day when you push them into production. The problem also is not just the push into production, it's the fact of the time it takes to do so. It takes in average, of course, there's a lot of variations on that, but in average, let's say 9 weeks to develop a model. Well, it takes in average 9 months to deploy and implement a model. You can reduce that time if you have the proper tooling, of course, but at the same time, that number of time needs to be taken into consideration to manage expectations for the teams with which we're going to work in order to push those models into production. So again, barely moved at my midline, although it's been quite a while now and we have quite a lot of experience to do that. What we are seeing also is a move from machine learning operationalization, MLOps, to ModelOps. By the move of that, we mean that a lot of the models that we start to push into production these days are not just machine learning. They are looking at all of the other AI techniques and AI families. From an MLOps perspective, machine learning operationalization perspective, well, a lot of things remain about the same, except that they are still difficult to put into production. But the development cycle is based around the old CRISP-DM methodology, a methodology we have been using for 25 years now, but is battle-tested. Yep, we've done some modifications now and there to be able to make the data more accessible, to get more work be done on upstream with data ops, operations, and disciplines. But basically, the CRISP-DM model is the same, except that we still forget on a regular basis to look at the business understanding as the first step of the CRISP-DM cycle. Many of my clients, when they get a problem, they jump on the data right away. It's exciting. It's fun to do, except that they are losing sight sometimes of the end goal. So the business understanding is very important. And by the way, not just because we want to develop good models, but operationalizing model properly starts with business understanding. Where is the model going to run? Who is going to use it? Which applications are going to take advantage of it? How are we going to be able to measure its efficacy from a different side of perspectives? How are we making sure that that model will make it to production efficiently? All those questions need to be asked at the very beginning of the development cycle. And then there's 2 other cycles that are very important here. Once the model is ready to be used into production, when it's been validated, then we're going to do first what we call a release cycle. So here, we're going to test the model in the wild. We have been nurturing that model in our sandbox. Everything is going well. Of course, it's behaving because it's behaving in a protected environment. When we put it into the real environment, how it's going to behave, what's going to happen. So that release cycle helps us to test that model in the real operations, but in a silent mode, making sure that we have the right places where we want to integrate that model, but also not activating it, not having an impact on the business problem right away. Once we validate that the model can survive in the wild, then we release it and we activate it. That activation then takes place where we're looking at finally the governing of that model, the cataloging of those models, the monitoring of those models, making sure that we have everything in place to make sure that model, once it's in production, can also be validated and revalidated on a regular basis. Because as a lot of my DevOps colleagues sometimes discover with surprise, the code of a model will degrade over time. It degrades for different reasons. That degradation is called drift. And often when that model is activated, is in production, we need to validate it over and over again. It needs to be governed properly. I've seen all kinds of different degradation capabilities. We've seen the fact that the data is changing. In that case, the model doesn't react the same way and tends to lose its precision a lot of times. And I've seen mathematical drift where you have a fraud patterns, for example, that you do look online for, and you are trying to see what are the different mechanisms the fraudsters are using to try to invalidate a card or to invalidate a transaction or something like that. Well, as they learn how to do that and you start catching them more and more and the pattern is being recognized, they change their patterns. So we need to change the algorithms in the background and revalidate that and redevelop often those models to be able to make that. A business drift happens when in the business something changes. It's not a data problem, it's not a pattern problem, but something radical happens. T-Mobile decides overnight to buy back the contracts. It sends ripple effect across the industries. And in that case, what happens? Well, then you have to rebuild most of the models that you have that do validate inbound and outbound marketing transactions. I've seen performance drift also, where IT somewhere is changing a system, revalidating a system somewhere, and suddenly the data does not come as fast as it used to. Well, in that case, your model is also going to lose in prediction and sometimes even not even able to perform because it's not getting the data at the right time and not all of them at the time it's needed. And lately, I've seen also some ethical drift. One of the large banks told me that they were actually applying a model to distribute credit cards. And that model was selecting, of course, customers according to the criteria of what was beneficial for the bank, obviously. And as they move forward, they realized that at some point in time, they were imbalancing the market. And the models, by keeping doing what it's doing, was starting to introduce some ethical issues on how it was delivering these credit cards. So as you can see, there are probably other drifts that are starting to happen as well. Revalidating those models, constantly monitoring the model in production is absolutely critical to determine their business value. So MLOps is something I can say we have down because, as you've seen, only 53% of people using those kind of techniques even still have a difficult time to push them into production. Therefore, the tooling that we need to make that happen. ModelOps is the next stage. So you take an ML model, a machine learning model, and we just did MLOps. Now you can have graph models, rules and heuristics models. You can have chatbots, conversational agents provide linguistic models, agent-based models, and all kind of AI techniques produce models. Any of them is going to have to be managed the same way, monitored the same way. They may not behave at all like a machine learning model. Their drift is not at all the same. Rule models have a very different patterns in terms of degradations. Agent-based model as well. And if you don't take into consideration the agent-based cooperation models that we are starting to see happen. So when you look at all of that, ModelOps is there to guarantee what I've shown you before, but not just for machine learning, but for AI models in general. So this is what we're looking for. Now, all these other aspects relating on models have still to be taken into consideration, as I mentioned before, if you want to be able to move forward and have them deliver the value they are supposed to be delivered as we move forward. I'm often asked, but these ops things, here's MLOps, ModelOps, data ops, platform ops, and there's a lot of ops. One of my colleagues went to the operational ops, which goes to oops. And often when we look at some of these problems, we realize that we confuse IT systems, we confuse a lot of people and executives around all of those. So it is true that all these ops models actually have proper definitions. For us, data ops, for example, is managing and scaling data pipelines, both upstream, by the way, to feed the ModelOps activities that we have, and downstream also to make sure that while we are in production, again, the data is delivered with the proper quality, at the proper speed, in the proper format to be able to feed those models. I talked about MLOps and ModelOps already. Platform ops look at managing and scaling AI platforms, because none of that happens also with a lot of equipment that we have today. It is true that when you train your models, often you bring your data warehouse to its knees, or at least you need to be able to provision the proper time to be able to do that. If you do that on the cloud, there's all kind of aspect of how much compute do you need to be able to do this. And that's for traditional models. When you start dealing with more complex kind of techniques, like deep learning techniques, for example, the training can be a little bit more expensive, and you need a proper platform to take advantage of that as well. It cannot be improvised. So you need to be able to pay attention to that. I'll make one sideline, which I don't want to confuse anything, but AI ops is a term you may have heard as well. AI ops is not an operationalization term. AIOps means the use of AI to solve IT problems. AIOps is a use case. It's how we use AI techniques to solve IT issues. So the term has been preempted. We use the term ModelOps, or the operationalization of AI models into production. There are things that do not change, though. We can also look at the ModelOps piece. We move into all the different aspects of what we have to take care of as we move forward into the marketplace. But there are things that do not change. And one of the top two that our clients are talking to us about today are security and ethics. And I will spend just a little time on those because they are very important. I'll say a word or two about autonomy, decisioning, and change management that are also invariants and be taken into consideration when we look at AI engineering, the systematization of moving AI models into production. Security is one of the top concerns that we have today, mostly among people that have started to be more mature on how they push model into production. That problem comes in different way, shape, or form across the life cycle of those models. It comes upstream when it's time to look at the data. Has the data really been poisoned or not? Has the data been changed, also modified to some extent to push a particular outcome or not? Is the data okay? Is it biased? Do we have in that data some impurities that we want to take out before we build those models? And how do we do that? From a development perspective, all those upstream data problems are also linked to security. There is also some ethical and privacy issues to take care of at that point. I will come back to this. But in the meantime, from that perspective, from the AI security perspective, the data upstream also has to be secured. And there's all kind of new techniques that we use, like differential privacy and some other techniques, to be able to make sure that we have the proper use of that data. While we develop the models, there's also a lot of security that we have to take care of, because insider threats is also a problem. As we look at some of that, we make sure that the model being built, again, do not gather enough bias, because you can still induce that bias within a model, obviously, by tuning a few parameters and making sure that the model behaves in a certain way. We have also manipulation at runtime, where we see a lot of query attacks to determine the model or the logic and try to reverse engineer what the models are about. Once you know that and you understand how the model behaves, then you can start to modify its behavior and do a few attacks also to be able to change that behavior. We've also seen model theft. Believe it or not, we've seen a lot of things where now more and more we see subsequent change and replacement of models subreptitiously to be able to go within the system and to replace the code, or changing slightly for whatever reason to get a particular outcome as well. In a lot of these models, people also embed their intellectual property. And when a model is being stolen and reverse engineers, you can actually deduce and infer a lot of that intellectual property, which is then stolen by the thieves and the people looking at that too. So a lot of these security issues around AI techniques are becoming something that organizations are really paying attention to. AI security and ethics are the top two problems mentioned by the people I talked about the survey that we finished last year. The other one being integration of ML models into production, like we are discussing right now. AI ethics guidelines is the other issue also. It is true that if we do not foster trust and transparency within the models that we distribute within an enterprise, two things will happen. Our customers are going to start to lose confidence in how we conduct business with them. And internally, organizations and teams like marketing, sales, supply chain, they're going to also say, you know what, if I cannot see how that model performs and how it behaves, forget it. I'm not going to use it. And the fact is that if you don't process that trust, part of the 47% of models that are not seeing the light of production are sometimes perfectly good models that deliver good results, but the business team doesn't want to use them because they cannot see properly what the model is doing. So it's about security and theft. It's about making sure that the model is not biased to a large extent. We can prove the fact that the model is not biased. We have a way to open the black box, but also be able to interact with the models to make sure that they behave in a certain way and give them what-if scenarios that business owners may think about, and as developers, we may not have thought about. No secret manipulation of some of those either. Making sure that once the model is produced and it's in a place where it can be looked at, it has to be secured. So that operationalization of the model also include a big part of security and a big part of access control to make sure that nobody is tinkering with the models that are in production. Human-centric and social beneficially. Well, there's a lot going on here in terms of making sure that we have those models used efficiently, but also for the benefit of the clients that we work with. I do understand the recommendations are often based also on our business imperatives, obviously, but we need to be transparent on how they are recommending those different aspects of things. Now, socially beneficial means different things across the globe, depending on the culture, on the countries, on the different aspects of what people are looking at. It's totally understandable, but it needs to be laid out very clearly. The guidelines to be there, the guardrails need to be there as well to make sure that when those models are being deployed, they are also fine with not just the development department or the business, but also the legal department and part of what the company stands for also from a strategic perspective. So that human centricity is absolutely critical also when it comes to AI ethics guidelines. I mentioned that before already, but interpretable and transparent is absolutely critical. You need to open up. Trust is absolutely necessary for models that are going into production to be effective and then be also used repetitively and reproduced properly when they put into business. Most of that interpretability and transparency have tools around you to be able to be used. And often inside the organization, what it comes down to is accountability. Once you know who is accountable, believe me, across the chain, if you spread that accountability as well, not too much, but enough to be able to make sure that when something goes wrong, you can go back. You get a lot of right behavior when that starts to happen. So accountability is absolutely necessary to make sure that we implement the right AI governance through the tool of operationalization as well to make sure it happens. And finally, fairness. I'll come back to what I mentioned before. It's not just about ethics. It's also about how we treat people when these models are being produced. That ethical drift that I mentioned before, that large bank has been able to identify, is a great example of this. So again, AI ethics is becoming an important one. Now, when you look at accountability, a little sideline on the autonomy problem I mentioned before. More and more I see clients of mine deploying models that are autonomous, models that make decisions by themselves. And that sounds a little far-fetched, right? Except that when you have your credit card authorized, and when you know there's 3 million of those authorizations happening every 2 minutes, you realize that a lot of systems are making a lot of decisions automatically and autonomously as well. So again, more of those systems that are becoming more autonomous also have to be a conversation, not just with the technical team, but with the business and leadership team as well. How much risk are we ready to take? How much risk do we taking when we do some of that? How liable are we if some of that goes wrong? And are we ready to accept this? It's not just a technical discussion at that point. I'm not going to spend too much time on change management, but it is also something that we have started to really look deeply into. A lot of the AI systems that have failed to move to production have also shown that when you start doing the analysis, it unveils a lot of possibilities within business processes. And changing a business process is not easy. Changing a workflow for employees and machines alike is not easy at all and requires a lot of commitment. So change management has to be put in place in order to accompany some of those changes that are being shown by what those techniques can produce. Yeah, they are that powerful to be able to show us sometimes that we've been doing things for quite a while that could be a lot more efficient done in a very different way. And that chart with decisioning. Everything we put together in organizations, when it's analytics, when it's AI, it's to make decisions. So the decision aspect also is part of that AI ethics. What I mean by that is often when we deny a loan to someone or deny coverage or something like this, it goes back to the technology and saying, oh, the algorithm said, well, that's not good enough anymore because decisions are made as a flow. There's someone launching it somewhere in there. The model is providing a piece of information, but fact is that among that decision, there's a lot of other things that happen around it. So decisioning is becoming an important part also on how we systematize the move of AI models from prototype to production as well. We recommend that you pay close attention to the technical depth of the models that you deploy. And because of that, a lot of the models that you have and tooling that you have in place now to be able to accompany you in moving those models to production is absolutely critical. You're not software developers. Your organization's trying to do your business, make a profit, or serve citizens. You're able to do all of this because you have support behind you to be able to make that happen. So it is highly recommended that you put that tooling in place to help you minimize that debt, as we talked about, and not just for machine learning anymore, but for some other AI models as well. You need to ensure the integrity, the transparency, and sustainability of the AI model. It goes back to the security and ethical aspect of what I mentioned before. And fairness, trustworthiness, reliability, and in my book, accountability are the main things that are going behind that. Identify the project where data-driven, ML-only approach could be something that you need to be able to apply to get the result that you expect. One of my boss at SPSS used to tell me there is actually one simple formula to apply machine learning within an enterprise. It's think big, start small, act fast. Think big, pick a problem that's big enough that nobody can deny you. It's like, yeah, I could have not done that with Excel, that's for sure. So think big, a big problem that has an impact. Small enough, remember, 9 weeks being the magical number for developing models. So 9 weeks is important to do if the scope is reduced enough. Act fast because you can't wait forever until the project is perfect, the data is perfect, all the stars are aligned for you to start, because you'll never start. So you need to be able to do that right away. So that's why part of where you identify those projects is looking into exploring the expressive power, and I'll come back to composite AI in a minute, but making sure you also address problems that are significantly requiring some of that differentiation that you have not been able to solve often with traditional techniques. And finally, you're going to need some skills. Now, contrary to common belief, AI talent is not that hard to find. I know it's a bit counterculture for me to say that, but let me explain. I think a lot of the AI experts you need are already there inside your organization today. And all they're going to need is some upskilling, but the curiosity is there. Some of the basic knowledge only, needs to be there and upskilled. Yep, you may also have people coming from the outside and hire people from the outside. But fact is that the reason why people have had such a hard time to find AI expert is that they are not looking for AI expert. They are looking for AI unicorns. And by definition, those unicorns do not exist. So then we say, we can find them. Yeah, of course you can't. But there's a lot of that talent that's already there that you can leverage. So I would recommend that you look within your organization today, and that talent may come from very unexpected places. Do a Kaggle competition, do something like that to unveil that talent that is already there. You got people that understand your organization, understand your business processes, already have a network of people they understand, and also people you are likely to be able to keep for quite a while. So I would recommend that. I've seen a lot of my clients do that, and it's very effective. And they are saying now, and part of the survey I mentioned twice already so far, one of the big surprises in that survey was that 70% of the organizations that we surveyed are telling us we don't have an AI talent problem. That's not where the issue is. The issue is in data insecurity. It's in integrating models into business environments. Those are the problems, or some of the data issues too, but not the AI talent part. Now, we talked about ModelOps. That was stage 1. More is coming. I talked about the fact that ModelOps takes care of multiple AI techniques. Composite AI talks about that. There's 2 phases of composite AI. Composite AI today often means the assembly of AI techniques to solve a particular problem. I may be using machine learning to detect segments in my client base. And then I'm using rule-based systems to filter those segments according to compliance rules that I have to obey for. And then I'm using optimization techniques to make sure that I can operationalize a lot of these different models that I've put around and a lot of these materials, products, services that I need to produce in order to serve my customer in the best way. And then I may be using natural language processing techniques to help my clients to answer a few questions for the products, for them to buy them, or then to service them. That assembly of AI techniques we call composite AI. We believe that as we move from ModelOps to composite AI, we are going to need the same kind of AI engineering discipline principles that we have been applying before. So that's why putting those in place today is so important. Now, with ModelOps and composite AI, we have been deciding what the systems are doing and what they are about. Well, imagine when the systems start to have a voice, when they start to produce data, when they start to produce solutions, when they start to produce some of the different problems that you are solving in terms of concept and ideas and themes. Well, in that case, when the content is starting to be produced also by the system themselves, we are starting to have a collaboration, human-machine collaboration at the development stage. That's generative AI. Synthetic data today, CAD/CAM, computer-aided manufacturing, computer-aided design systems that are producing new designs by machines are the generative adversarial networks, the GANs that are producing those pictures you can't even distinguish from the reality anymore, are actually coming from a generative AI wave. So it's already around. But it's going to be stage 3 as we move. We're all going to adaptive systems. I do firmly believe that had we have some systems that were more flexible and adaptive last year, we would have probably fared a little better business-wise in the community of the business, going to the shock that we had to go through. And those adaptive systems are going to take advantage of all these AI techniques to become almost flexible from an automated manner, if that's an oxymoron for you. Flexible from an automated manner. But more of what we are going toward are the ability then to be also providing systems that are going to be able to react better as a new shock happens, because it will, as we move forward. Thank you very much for your attention today and for inviting me. It's a privilege to be with you today. So thank you very much for inviting me. As I mentioned before, that AI engineering technique is one of the top trends that we follow at Gartner. And we are making sure also that we look at all these different aspects of that trend as we move forward, change management being the next one that we are pushing into the market as well. And with that, I'm ready for any questions that you might have. Thank you very much once again.
Eric, I'm so glad you're ready for questions, because questions is what you have received across the last half an hour. Thank you so much. What a brilliant way to kick off this summit. So we have had a fair few questions. Now we're going to try and get through as many as possible, but do keep sending them in. My colleagues are going to be sending them to me as and when you send them in, so get them in. So Philip, thank you for sending in the first question of the summit. Now, Philip has asked, do you have a survey which shows the percentage of developers who are adopting ModelOps?
Yes, so we do have some of that. Within the survey that we had, among the 53% of the people that you have there, all of them are using any form of ModelOps capabilities. Okay, all of them are. Now, we have more than those, because we have those that have started to adopt some of those ModelOps capabilities, are early in their journey, and have not yet completely delivered at scale like we have seen before. So they have been able, in the survey, we made a distinction between the people that have delivered one problem in one department, multiple problems in one department, and then multiple problems in multiple departments. So we've done the categorization of that. So people that have adopted ModelOps only for one problem in one department, we have not put into the 53% in success. So they have ModelOps capabilities, but they have not been able to move to the next stage yet, right? So they're still early on their journey. So that is why we have that. So I would say that among the people we interviewed, now keep in mind, we had a lot of, for that survey, we had a lot of gate factors. We looked at 14,000 organizations and retained only 600. So we are very stringent. How long have you been doing AI techniques? At least 3 to 5 years. How much models do you have in production today? Well, at least 10 or 20, and then it goes to the thousands after that, and so on, right? So we really have a very important, very mature audience here that we needed to talk to, and so that is why when you reach a certain level of maturity, you have to use ModelOps techniques, right? Actually, I think it's kind of the inverse. If you don't use ModelOps techniques, you don't reach that level of maturity. I think that's kind of that had a causality effect here. But yes, so I would say the propensity of them is almost, among the 600 we have interviewed, 80% of them have ModelOps capabilities in place. None of them has totally operationalizing them yet, but that's probably what they have today.
Perfect. Well, there you go, Philip. I hope that added some value to you, I am sure. So Bamal asks, how do we ensure that continuous model validation is in place?
So that what we suggest is that the methodology that I showed, that was a little grayed out in the background, I didn't want to be too detailed today, although we can be, there's no problem with that. Those three circles that you've seen when I talked about ModelOps is actually the synthesis of about 20 top clients that I've been working with for the last 20 years. It's been that long. Machine learning used to be called predictive analytics. Before that, it used to be called data mining. Marketing does a great job at changing the names, but in the back, it's always the same thing. Now, most of what we've been looking at are people that have done this originally without any tooling because they didn't have any tooling. They had to put it themselves together. So we made a big synthesis of that. Now, from the blue circle that you see, the development circle, the two yellow and gray circle that are about the production, then that's how you make sure that the gray circle is how you make sure that you have a continuous monitoring of those models. So you need, when you put a model in production, there's a number of telemetry that goes on with the models. Different people have different ways of looking at it. They have different concerns about their models, but they're all putting telemetry in place to try to capture the drift I mentioned. So I have almost all my clients look at data drift, right? That's the basics. Then some of them look into mathematical drift, so model pattern drift, and so on. Some of them do. A few look at business drift, not many, but the ones that have been at this for quite a while, the most mature ones are doing that. And then after that, you get the other two drifts that are starting to show up now. So that continuous monitoring goes into the telemetry that you put in place as soon as you validated the KPIs from the release mode that I mentioned, the yellow circle that I mentioned. And it goes into the gray one. Then you have to get in place a store, a model store in place, a catalog there. You have to make sure the governance is placed as well. And then that telemetry has to be able to report to the different operators on a regular basis. When I say regular, it depends on you. Some of my clients do that on the sub-second basis. Some of them do that every 5 minutes. Some of them every 2 weeks, every 6 months. So it really depends on how fast your business is moving and what you are monitoring looks into in order to put that continuous monitoring in place. But you need that instrumentation. And often, just finishing on that, it's a long answer to your question. I'm finishing with that. Often they have a dashboard that they either put in the hands of what we call an ML engineer or an IT person or a business person, and that dashboard will monitor constantly also how those drifts are doing, how that telemetry is performing for them to make a decision.
Amazing. Eric, you're adding so much value. I love the depth you're going into. Fantastic. So let's go for Havad. Havad asks, what is the regulator's point of view regarding ML techniques and their validation? Is validation of machine learning obligatory?
It's not, but it should be. And often people that do not look at it come to regret it sometimes. So I would say you need to be able to pay attention to it. You need to have something in place and start asking the questions about it. It is true that not everything is subjected to the same scrutiny when it comes to regulatory issues. But things like you would say, well, is it important for me to be transparent and explain and be about a recommendation about the product, for example, right? So do I have to go through that? Well, yes, you do, because in Europe, for example, with the GDPR regulations, if you're not using the right data, or if you're using data you don't have access to, or should not be using the data for the application you're using them to, you can be in trouble. So you need to be able to make sure constantly that you are validating that. Actually, it's interesting you say that or the question being asked, because there's a new role in the enterprise that are starting to emerge called the ML validator. And that person looks at the observability of the model throughout its life cycle. When the data is being gathered, when the model is being created, when it's getting to production, what is being used in production, and then back, right? So the ML validator looks at that. So yes, I would say you need to be able to do that. Now, again, it's going to be also in the hands of the regulators are looking into this. Yes, the law is evolving to be able to look at some of those as well. You need something in place, but you need to be conscious of the impact that you have when you're starting to do that. Let me give you a very quick anecdote. One of my clients is actually 3 blocks away from my apartment, and it's Northwestern Hospital in Chicago. And I was in a room with them at some point where we had actually doctors, oncologists, people from the legal department and from the IT department talking about machine learning that was for building some of those machine learning for early detection of cancer treatments. And so they were still, of course, false positive. So there are still cases where you can say to someone, well, you may have cancer, which is a very dramatic and traumatic experience. And in fact, they don't. And it's very small. It's maybe like 0.5% of, or not even, maybe 0.05% of the people, right? So, so the legal department said, no, that's not acceptable. The legal people around the room said, around the table were saying, that's not, unless your thing is 100%, I don't want any of that. If we are liable for that kind of traumatic experience, the hospital can lose a lot of money. We don't want to do that. But the doctors on the other side were saying, wait a minute. I mean, so you mean that, like in that very extreme rare case, actually something like that happens, it's bad. But what about all the people we detect early? How many lives are we going to save if we detect that early and I can treat my patients earlier? So I don't care about your false positive. I want that system in place. That debate was very interesting. Far from me to say what's right, what's wrong, because that's not my job and that's not what I have to do. But I think that debate shows that we need to take into consideration many voices within the organization about those issues. And yes, the regulators are important. They have their word to say, and it's being regulated more and more, but we need to be able to have those conversations as well, because they are critical for our society.
Absolutely. That's such a great example, Eric, as well, because I mean, it's such an emotive area that you can actually see both sides of the coin. So I think it demonstrates that point really, really fantastically. Right. We have about 3 or 4 minutes left here, so let's keep going. So I've got a message that says, hi, Eric, this is Yarl's son from the Bank of America. Can you talk about the how long should we test and validate the model in the dark pod, or in brackets, he's popped it as the silent mode, before launching it to live users? I assume there are some short-term metrics you can track to govern the model operation, but what about long-term metrics that are not easily observable in the short time? Thank you very much. Great question.
It is. And I believe it or not, I had people like when I mentioned the problem for the hospital just now, there's other issues like that are appearing where the legal team says, no. Okay, so we understand you cannot have it for 100%, we understand, but then it needs to be thoroughly tested. So they have that stuff in silent mode for a year. Those models that keep churning. And every time the business people say, can you imagine if we had put this in production, the money we would have made, or the people would have saved, or the citizens would have served, or whatever it is. But I have people that go into production for quite a while to satisfy the legal aspect of it. Usually a silent mode in average, I would say, in a business doesn't last more than a few weeks. I have 3 weeks maybe as an average, 4 weeks at tops. Except if, so it also deals with the number of the volume of transactions you're dealing with. If you have a very, very low volume of transaction, then it can stay there longer to make sure that you're addressing a lot of the use cases that could be coming in. But usually the transaction level is fairly high or sufficiently high to keep that model in about 2 to 3 weeks. I know it sounds like a long time, and there's a lot of impatience on the business side often to get those things going. But I think it's necessary. Now, that being said, I have also industries, and that seems to be varying, like the telcos, like the wireless telcos, for example, that are in silent mode for 2 or 3 days. Because they say, no. I mean, we are losing money every single day, and I can monetize. I can show you how much we are losing by not having that in production. So if you show me it works, and the volume of transaction is very high, usually also, to be honest. So usually that's what's happening. So that's what we have. Now, I also have people that do, and almost all of them, when you have them in production, you still have like a ghost cycle going in the background. So your model is in production, going through its regular round and everything, you're validating on a regular basis. But then in the background, there's actually a shadow thing going as well. It's testing different kind of models. They are champion challenging kind of things, canary models. I mean, you have different methods in the background that looks at a shadow one and looks at that model or that cycle better than the one that you are having in production today. I can count them like a silent mode too, because it is there. It's not saying anything, but it's still guaranteeing. And when I say one cycle, I have a lot of organizations that have 10, 50, or 100 cycles going on in the background, testing a few things. It's kind of the depth. That cycle is a 2D cycle when I put it on the screen, but it can be actually a 3D cycle. We have a lot of that going on in the background. So do they count that as silent mode? If we do, then in that case, I would say that it stays there. It's in silent modes for a long time, as long as the model is in production as well, because it keeps going.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eric. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today, but what an absolutely brilliant kickoff keynote. And I do apologize to Simalatha, Brandon, Jing, Kavit, Henry, Ashish. We've got a lot of questions we could keep covering. So, Eric, your emails are going to be very busy. But everyone who unfortunately we didn't get a chance to answer their question, please do connect with Eric. You can find him in the speaker directory or on LinkedIn, of course, as well. And I'm sure he'll be more than happy to discuss this very exciting topic. So, Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to be with you this morning. Have a good conference, everybody. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Catherine, for helping.
Absolutely brilliant. There we go. First session down, and now we will be heading in to our next panel discussion. We're going to take just a short break to make sure all the speakers can log into the platform. So if you'd like to go make a cup of tea, grab a drink, have a walk around, go quickly do that, and we'll be back in 2 minutes' time. Hello everyone, welcome back to our next panel discussion. And I actually have the pleasure of moderating this one, which I am so excited about. Now, it's all about the state of ModelOps. Now, here at the Business of Data, we have been busy creating the State of ModelOps 2021 report, which comprises of the first ever research into the state of model operationalization. Our survey of 100 executives from top global financial service companies provides a unique snapshot of the practices large enterprises are using to govern and scale mission-critical AI initiatives. Across the next 45 minutes, we will be discussing the key findings with a brilliant panel of speakers. Now, I am going to bring them all forward, and just as you have done for that keynote, please do send in those questions. My team is primed and ready to get them up, and we're not going to be doing Q&A at the end. We'll integrate them into the questions that we have planned here, so please do send them when you think of them. So I'm going to bring all the speakers onto stage. 1 second here. Wow, goodness me. We have a big panel of experts here today. Absolutely wonderful. Lovely to see you all. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask you each to pop yourself on mute if you aren't the one talking. And I'd love for a quick introduction of your name, job title, company, and just a little bit about yourself. So we'll start off with you, Skip. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm Skip McCormick. I run data science at Baker New York Mellon.
Amazing. Thank you, Skip, for joining us. Deb, welcome. If you'd like to intro yourself.
Hi, I'm Deb Grace with New York Life. I manage operations for the Center for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. My department manages the change management, program management, and model governance, as well as all of our workflow.
Amazing, Deb. Thanks for joining us. Mina, hello. If you'd like to intro yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Meena Thanikachalam. I'm head of data strategy and architecture for Ally Financial. Happy to be part of this panel session today.
Thanks so much, Mina. And Jody, hello, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Jody Blomberg. I was the Senior Managing Director for Data Science at Charles Schwab, and I will soon be the Senior Director for Data Science at Waste Management.
Amazing, exciting things ahead. Thank you so much, Jody. Catherine, hello, if you'd like to intro yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Zhao. I run the electronic trading, quant research, and technology team at Cantor Fitzgerald. So our team actually spans, our platform actually spans across different asset classes, including equities, FX, and US Treasuries. I look forward to today's discussion.
Amazing, Catherine. Thank you so much. And Ursula, hello, welcome.
Hi, I'm Ursula Catone. I'm the Chief Data Officer at Huntington Bank. It's based in Ohio, a regional bank.
Thank you so much. And I think we've just lost Jean-Luc there, but I'm sure he'll reappear. As is the perils of an online event, is you do get a few technical hiccups, but touch wood, will be all right for the rest of the session. So as I said at the top there, we do have a few pre-planned questions for this discussion, but I would love to be able to tailor it to what you would love to hear from these brilliant executives, because the power and the minds we have in the room is just absolutely fantastic. So please make use of this 45 minutes. So with that being said, I'm going to kick off with my first question, which is, our research shows that that organizations are starting to create model operator roles with staff dedicated to monitoring and the maintenance of models in production. So my question is, why do you think that is? And to what extent is this the case in your organization? So Jean-Luc, as you are back, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and kick off with that question, please.
Sure. Sorry about the connection. I'll call Comcast. I'm Jean-Luc Chatelain. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Accenture Applied Intelligence. We're a group of about 25,000 people, including 4,000 data scientists. So you can understand that ModelOps is very important to us. Regarding your question, it's an excellent one. I think that in the world of ModelOps, a lot of people have focused on making data scientists happy and not focusing on what's real important, which is the operationalization of the data science. And therefore, that position of model operator that will be sitting sort of halfway between IT and the data science is critical, because that's what's going to keep the business of the 21st century is going to be a digitally transformed company which leverages models and of course their insight everywhere. So critical component, I completely agree.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So we've heard from Jean-Luc. Nina, I'll come to you second. Why do you think this is, and to what extent is this the case in your organization at Ali?
Yeah, so the state of model ops, I would say, is evolving today. Many organizations have adopted machine learning and data science. While there is early adopters, a majority of the organizations are still thinking through operational challenges. And a part of the issue with the industry is, while there are capabilities available, not many organizations have adopted ModelOps. And even though it's a branch within DevOps, the ModelOps needs specific skill set. And I think the organizations, most organizations do not have that skill set needed to move models from development to production. And they spend a lot of time in maneuvering through various processes, like be it is governing the models, be it is making sure there are no biases in the model, model risk management. There are various teams involved. And there's not enough knowledge about the capabilities available, and most of the organizations are looking at adding additional resources to address this, while the industry is moving towards advancement in the space, especially ModelOps. I think it's just lack of awareness, I would say, is one of the reasons. Now, other reason is like the pace in which organizations are growing tremendously, and there is need to constantly deliver at scale in production. So I think that's possibly the reason for short-term decisions to go and invest in a role like model operator or ModelOps operator, rather than thinking through, how can I solve this through technology advancement? And I would say, so that's been the case for organizations to invest in a role like this rather than, using the technology, because there's a lack of awareness, the pace in which organizations are expected to deliver, and the adoption of technologies. And also, there's also challenge when it comes to the risk of adopting technologies. Like we constantly talk about ethical unfairness, biases. So those are the possible reasons I would say organizations are investing in this type of roles.
Fantastic, Meena. You always add such value. Thank you so much for the depth of that answer. Jody, how about you? What's it looking like in your own organization and experiences? And then why do you think we are seeing this creation of this new role?
We did choose to have an in-house, a small team, as a bridge between our data science team and IT. Our IT teams are there to make sure that the platform stays up, the code runs and alert us if it breaks. I'm there to make sure that even if the code runs, the model's still providing value, right? It's not biased. It's still providing value to the firm, which is a different kind of monitoring. And so we chose to have a couple of folks focus on that and provide what I would call a layer of abstraction as well. So make everybody better. Don't solve the problem for this model, solve it for 20. And so to have a couple of folks thinking that way and thinking about how to get models in production, and also how to keep them there, seemed like a good use of time, rather than having each data scientist think about that one by one. Certainly a work in progress, but I think it's the direction that a lot of our digitally native competitors already are, and a place that a lot of bigger companies are going to go. In addition, for financial services, we're highly regulated, right? We have to manage our model risk in very specific ways. And so that team managed that as well. That really helps us. Managing model risk and managing model performance are kind of the same thing, right? There's so much overlap there. So we had a single team kind of focus on how our models are performing from every perspective.
Amazing. I can already, this is the challenge of a virtual event, right? I can imagine in a conference hall, people be scribbling down those notes. I loved that soundbite there, Jody, about fixing 20 models, not just one. That was absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. Deb, what's it looking like for you in your situation, in your organization, and why do you think we're seeing this current trend?
Well, like most of my colleagues have already mentioned, it's very similar for us. You know, we've installed a ModelOps team within our data science team to help us carry those models to technology more efficiently. So, you know, that's been a really important part of our ability to bring models to production. We're a relatively small team, 50 people, and we have 6 people in ModelOps just on our side, and they're the liaison to our technology partners. But I do think that it's really important for us to acknowledge that because this is relatively new, it's on the data science team to help bring this information to everyone else in the organization, to help technology understand that models are different and that we have to work together. We have to build a real team of people to support everyone who's involved, whether it be your business stakeholder, your MLOps team in our operation, or your technology partners, right? So, you know, I think it's vital to have MLOps on as a liaison on our side, as well as some real talent on your technology side as we build that up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Deb. Skip, how about you? What does that look like for you?
Well, wow, my computer just prompted me. At Bank of New York Mellon, we have a very sophisticated model governance organization with that's well resourced and staffed with some competent people. But these new kinds of models, they sort of get dropped into that team to manage. But the only thing that really there is in common between the AI models we're building, the machine learning models, these continuously improving models, and all of the other models they're used to handling, is the word model, right? And so their process is very systematic and deliberate, and we show up with models that are, to them, look like they're very immature, yeah, because it's a machine learning model. They all start immature, all right? They look poorly documented, because how can you explain what's going on in a convolutional neural net? And so we've had to enhance that team in terms of skills and resources. We're building a ground truth platform that provides a third-party tracking of metrics like precision and recall, data stability, model stability, Breyer scores, does automated ablation analysis of input data, so that we can make the case to say this model is this good. All right, it's this accurate, it's this precise, it's this stable, and now it should be approved to be used for some decision making. But there's a lot to that, and the team that does this is coming up to speed very, very quickly. There's a small subset of the internal model governance team that's been working very closely with us as we design and build the APIs into this ground truth environment. I come from a government environment previous to Bank of New York Mellon, where I spent a long time building decision support systems, predictive analytics, and supercomputing for making very important decisions. And you get used to having to build sort of the long picture over time to say, here's how good our forecasts have been over time. And then you feed that to somebody who's already an experienced expert who's been making decisions based upon statistical models and their own intuition, and you're augmenting them. You're giving them superior sort of intelligence and foresight that they couldn't have without the machine learning part of this. But to keep things from sort of being a tier 1 risk, we like to have the model feeds information to a human being who comprehends the bigger picture and the consequence of making a decision before that feeds into some automated process.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Skip. Now, who have we got left? Gosh, what a big panel of fantastic speakers we've got here. Catherine, yeah. What's it looking like for you, your organization, and why do you think we are seeing this trend?
Yeah, so in my organization, so we have a very small quant research team, only like less than 10 people. So what we do is a quant develops a model, and then another quant will independently validate and test the model before the model can be put into production. So putting this uniform governance process in place has helped us tremendously to manage the model risk effectively. So our current process goes like this. So a need for a model comes up, and we will assign a quant to work on it. And then after that, another quant will be assigned to validate it. And then if everything, if the model is approved, then the model will be implemented into UAT, and then the QA tested in UAT. And then we have a small flow rollout in production using very limited internal flow to test it, to make sure the model does what it's supposed to do. And then if everything goes as expected, we'll do a full production release for internal flow. And after that, we'll roll it out to external clients. So and also even after the model is in production and being running for a period of time, we'll still do ongoing performance measurement and potential enhancement if required. So because our risk appetite is small, so it's all about adding more safety guards and de-risking. So that's why we implemented this, a lot of the steps in the governance process, just to make sure that we stay within the risk parameters and limit our exposure in production. So I would say the current setup has worked very well for us, has been really working for us. And there's a system of checks and balances in place. However, we're also prepared to make changes for the future if and when the needs for a separate ModelOps team comes up, and we'll make the necessary investment when that comes.
Amazing. Now, Catherine, I'm so glad you raised risk, because we have already had a question come in about that, and I do have a couple of statistics to share from the report about exactly that. So fantastic, it's already been brought up. And then last but certainly not least, Ursula, if you would like to answer this introduction question, please.
Yeah, sure. So what's interesting is this study and the work that's being done in this space coincides very nicely with the work that we've got just now getting underway as well. We've been doing different types of marketing models now for a number of years. We have our model risk management team in place, but as we want to start to scale artificial intelligence for the bank, we've started to look at this concept of both the MLOps and ModelOps. Being the chief data officer, the ModelOps piece would fall into my team. Like Jody described, I'm a team in between the businesses, our analytics teams, and technology. And so the information that came out in the survey that sort of helps me think through how are we going to manage that, what kind of roles are we going to need. We're just starting to get the staffing in place for that so that we can start to really scale the AI work that we have planned.
Fantastic. Slight delay there because we're having questions come in thick and fast now. So I'm going to go firstly to one of the questions from Jatinta. Thank you for sending that in. And their question is, how is ModelOps helping with reducing ModelOps and other risks as compared to traditional processes around models and their governance? And as I say, I did want to mention that in our report and study, which you can access in the resource area, so if you want to see any of these statistics, do pop in there and download it. Now, in that, we found out that 80% say difficulty managing risk and ensuring compliance is a barrier to AI adoption for their enterprise. So I'm keen to know, again, let's explore these challenges. Why do you think they're present, and what are you doing to tackle these? So Catherine, you touched on it slightly there, so I'll come back to you for that one.
Yeah, sure. So in my view, managing risk and ensuring compliance is not just a barrier, to AI adoption. Any project, any serious project requires a thorough and continuous risk assessment in order to be successful, because doing so enables you to address issues before they arise. And as AI machine learning becomes more and more common practice, understanding how these models arrive at their conclusions is vital to improving their the model performance. However, their forecasts often cannot be easily interpreted, right? So that's why there's an interpretable machine learning techniques, even like being researched and discussed very widely today. So because their forecasts often cannot be easily interpreted due to numerous features and complex computations, from which they draw the conclusions. So currently researchers, they compensate this difficulty of interpretability with domain knowledge, with their experiences, their observations, and continuous monitoring, and through risk management or risk assessment. So my suggestion is, before you start an AI project, it's very critical. It's critical to ask yourselves, like, what are you trying to achieve with this AI project, right? What is the business use case? It's really crucial to formulate a clear strategy before you embark on an AI project, and also set realistic expectations. You need to define success criteria on the model performance, together with your business partners or your customers, so that you can ensure the success rate, and also ensure that you're measuring your model performance on the right criteria. And then in terms of like AI model challenges, there are a few that I want to highlight. So the first one is data challenges. Like, do you have the data? Like, do you have the right data? And do you have the right amount of data, right? So, we all know garbage in, garbage out. So your data needs to be clean and representative of, what you are trying to model and what you are trying to achieve. And then the second one is the people or talent challenge. So do you have the right people in your organization, or do you have the plan to hire the right people? Not every PhD can do the job. It actually requires domain knowledge, as well as the technical skills to make the project successful. And then the third one would be the organizational challenge. So, for example, if your organization, these models will reside in an ecosystem that already exists in your organization. So the integration with the existing system is a critical part of the thinking process. You need to make sure it's easily achievable and within your reach. And then also, do you have the time? Like, if your organization requires a faster delivery of everything, then you should probably look other ways. And the last one would be the regulatory challenges. So are there any regulatory hurdles, like either current or in the future? Like, you need to follow up with what's going on in terms of regulation changes to make sure what you do fit in that framework. And also this includes model regulations. I think other panelists already touched on model regulations, and a lot of firms have gone through the whole process and multi-year process to make sure their models are compliant with regulations. So all of these are challenges to embark on the AI project, in my view.
Fantastic, Catherine. And again, I can just visualize the notes being scribbled down there. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. So Jean-Luc, as I say there, 80% say, and that's such a large number, right, saying that the difficulty of managing risk and ensuring compliance is the barrier. So what does that look like for you? How are you overcoming this challenge, and how does ModelOps help with that? Oh, I believe you are on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
I said, to the risk of repeating some of what Catherine had said, nothing is really new in that demand for ModelOps, right? Whether the traditional model or AI. I think AI brings some additional difficulty, but the need for transparency, for quality, for repeatability, for explainability has always been there. What I think is happening is two things. First, and I may be making enemies here, but data science is moving from the cottage industry to an industry that truly needs to be operationalized at scale. And scale changes a lot of things. Therefore, there is a greater need right now for that governance to be in place, and for the tools to be there to help along that journey, I would say. Now, what AI is bringing is some subtlety around the fact that, as I think Skip said, that not all models are explainable today. And it's just, to me, it's a maturity of our understanding of how they function. But so the need for making sure along the way, not just in operation, but from the moment you create a model in AI to the moment you deploy it, that every step of the way, the bias is being measured, the surface of attacks are being identified, and the explainability is present, is very important. I personally don't buy that compliance or governance or regulatory is a barrier to entry. I honestly think it's a cop-out, right? Because we've had to do that all the time. So now that it has to be done at scale, thanks to the emergence of the formalization of ModelOps, I would say, I think we will see better results and faster adoption. But I shouldn't say that, but I'm not going to let the data scientists tell me that it's too hard, to do the right thing, because we've had to do it forever.
Fantastic, Jean-Luc. Don't worry, we're all friends here. We can have a healthy debate without making enemies, for certain. Thank you so much. Skip, you're smiling away there, so I'm going to pick on you next. At 80% sounds like a large number for our research. What's your experience in this?
Well, risk is one of our chief concerns at Bank of New York Mellon. We invest a lot of effort and time into managing it. The bank's been around for close to 300 years. It was founded by Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton. So to survive that long, we've had to take risks seriously and plan ahead. We are a custody bank, so our customers are counting on us to manage the risk because they want their assets held safely. So in most cases, experts make decisions at the bank. What we're trying to do is capture this larger opportunity with sort of the lower risk area where we can take existing processes and boost them. We can give our risk decision makers superior intelligence and foresight by considering all the data, considering all the factors, right? Statistical models naturally take subsets of the data. That's how statistics work. An AI model looks at everything, and so outliers, inliers, the whole deal. And those models can feed that expert decision maker with additional insight that they wouldn't have had otherwise, so they can make better decisions, right? And that's the goal: is to sort of arm our decision makers and our clients with superior foresight. And that means that the information we're giving them has to come fully instrumented with independent third-party metrics for all of the trending metrics that matter. Like if someone tells me the probability of this happening just went up by 20%, think of it like you're listening to a weather report. Does this weatherman often give me the right data, right? Does this weatherman, when they say it's an 80% chance of a hurricane, have they been right, and how often, right? Those kinds of metrics have to be managed, and you cannot let the data scientists provide you those kind of metrics because they have too much invested, right? It has to be an independent third party, and so that's why we're building it that way. All of our forecasting models submit all their forecasts to a ground truth system that tracks all those metrics, and so any forecast that's provided to any customer comes with the benefit of precision and recall, or F1, harmonic scores, Breyer scores. And in that sense, we're also having to teach people what do these metrics mean and how do you use them. And in that sense, we need to work with the regulators to say, when you're doing prediction machines, how do you govern them? What are the standards we need to give the builders of these things so that they can comply with something that makes sense, right? The standards and the models for governing models are pretty well known now, but they work for sort of mathematic models that you can bring in, a room full of PhDs and give them some time to validate it. They can do the math over and over. They can stress the variables and those things. Those same approaches don't really work for models that are retraining and updating overnight, right? There just isn't time. So you have to have some other solution. And so, so that's a big investment, and we're making that investment, and I like to think we're ahead of the curve on that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Skip. Now, I'm so conscious of time. We've only got about 10 minutes left. It's absolutely going away from me. So I'm just going to flip the question slightly, because the other challenges that were cited within our research include maintaining model audit trails for regulatory compliance and ensuring visibility into the status of models. Now, these are both questions that were actually brought up on our opening keynote. So it's very, very relevant to the audience. So I'm glad that the research holds true to the audience at this event. So the question is, how are you dealing with both of those challenges? Where are you on your journey to dealing with those challenges? Deb, I'll come to you first for that one.
So we're a relatively young team in that we've been up and running for about 4 years. And so we have stringent controls in place, but we kind of have them piecemeal. So we know that we have to put together a strategy if we really want to scale the operation to manage, all of that information and have it accessible to the auditors when they need it. So I think we've put it in place. It's somewhat piecemeal, but if we really want to grow, we have to have a much broader strategy that includes everyone who's involved in the team. So that's really where we are right now, is trying to put that strategy together with our technology team, with our business partners, with our data science team, to make sure that our audit trails are, training data and code and everything is easily accessible when and if people need to look at it.
Amazing. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Mina, how about you? What's your thoughts when it comes to regulatory compliance and then the visibility into the status of models?
Yeah, so I would say certainly regulatory compliance has been a barrier to adopting AI in many organizations. Specifically, when we talk about compliance and risk, so we talk a lot about ethical fairness, and most organizations have challenges in making sure that they could be fair to the population that they are serving, meaning the customer base. So I think ModelOps has simplified that by building some of the capabilities needed to monitor any biases. Yes, at all stages of model development, biases need to be monitored. But then with a technology like ModelOps, it becomes very easy for an organization to adapt and become more scalable and cater to the growing needs. And when we talk about operational efficiencies, right, the time that it takes to deploy a model to production could be several months in many organizations. It's not a clear-cut process, I would say, because to some of my colleagues' points, it involves collaboration across multiple teams, be it as business, IT, then there is operational teams, and then there is a data engineering function that you work with, and there's a variety of other functions that's involved in the whole process. And it has to be seamless integration when it comes to preparing your data, making sure you can develop your model, test it, and then tune the models. Then you work with your model risk management function, and then finally you take it to deployment. And there's also governance around these models. So how an organization can be more effective in making sure that you can cater to the market needs or demands. I think certainly ModelOps has got the vision and also the ability to stitch various IT services, be it is your Bitbucket, your Jenkins, your Jira, your project management tools, your reporting tools, or your governance tools. So ModelOps can provide that in one place. So it gives transparency to everyone who would use the product and be able to get the end-to-end view of where am I stuck or what is holding me, and would help me monitor things very closely. And also, after the model gets deployed into production, there's constant monitoring of models. available. So, you could be alerted when the threshold goes below the criteria that you have set. And also, most of the models in production in many organizations would degrade at least 20 to 25% most of the times. And by investing in a product or model ops capability, I would say the constant monitoring would help be more proactive and help eliminate any of the risks and also model degradation and add more value. So overall, I have felt that ModelOps is a good capability for any organization to invest in, be it as a small, medium-sized, or larger organization. And I would strongly encourage, that all of us start looking at it more closely.
There you go. There's your call of action from Mina. You've got to be looking at it more closely. I think everyone will be doing that after hearing that very much. So, Mina. Ursula, how about you? We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm keen to try and get as many voices included on this last point about regulation compliance and then the visibility and status of models.
So I'd say that the kind of like what Jean-Luc was saying, the regulatory side of this has not the primary focus for why we're doing this. It is about the operations piece. So when you say model ops, it's about the ops part of this. It's about driving it into a more operational process, having the efficiency of the operations, which includes the risk management component, but also includes the overarching, how do we do this from an efficient standpoint? We can continue doing what we've been doing for a long time. It's not this super brand new unique thing. It's really bundling it into thinking about it as an operational capability for us as a bank. And then the compliance and regulatory pieces fit nicely into that, but it is more than that.
Thank you so much, Ursula. Jody, how about yourself? Final thoughts from you on this?
Sure. I think model ops and automation are about the only way to get there, right? The demands from the business far outpace a traditional audit trail, for example. And so you need to have dashboards monitoring your model performance. You should have dashboards monitoring your bias. There are a lot of automated tools coming on the market, whether you home grow it or you build it, buy it. I think that's the only way to kind of move at the speed of business. And I have automated alerts. I think you just can't scale with humans. That's true for everything, but it's especially true for model ops. And so being thoughtful about when and how you monitor, but really getting that up in a place where any consumer can see it of the model, it builds faith for your business partner. And it also builds faith in the platform. So you need the thing to run and you need the thing to do what it's supposed to do. And you want to be monitoring both of those things.
Amazing. Thank you, Jody. Well, sadly, that is all the time we have today for this panel discussion. But obviously, the main discussion here has been framed around the report that we have just launched today. So you can head into the resource area to download a free copy of that. And thank you to everyone who has submitted your questions. We've got them in a central document. And these wonderful speakers will be joining the speaker meet and greet later today at 1 p.m, which will be taking place over Zoom. It will be two-way, so you can very much interact and chat with the wonderful speakers of today, and of course each other. So that level of networking that obviously we're all missing so much now. So hopefully we can have a little bit of that in there. So these questions are not going to go to waste. Thank you very much for sending them. And again, thank you to our brilliant speakers for coming and sharing their thoughts.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant. Well, there we go. So that is another panel done and dusted. What a fantastic day we're having at the ModelOps Summit. So we will be heading shortly into the next panel. If you need to go get a drink of water to stay hydrated to take in all this wonderful content, then please do. But we'll be back in a couple minutes' time. Hello, everyone. So I've got my next panelists and moderators sat backstage. They're ready to go. But if you haven't joined us earlier on the day, just a quick reminder to use the chat box to submit your questions. We've got a fantastic team there ready to collect all those questions. If you have any technical difficulties at all, firstly, refresh your browser. If they do keep persisting after that, head over to the help desk under your account. And remember, we would love to hear from you. So let us know in the chat if you are enjoying this fantastic summit. And given how many of you are submitting questions and adding your comments in, I think you are. So our next panel discussion is all about AI governance and risk. And I am very excited to welcome Stu Bailey. Where is he? There he is, because we've got another full panel joining us. So I'm going to bring up Stu, who is the co-founder and chief enterprise AI architect for ModelOps, who will be moderating the panel all about AI governance risk with a brilliant panel of speakers. So Stu, I'm going to go get your panelists. You can take it away. What a great session this is going to be.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine, and welcome everybody. We have an absolutely phenomenal panel here on AI governance and risk as it relates to ModelOps for this ModelOps Summit. This is just an amazing collection of practitioners, risk practitioners, and vendors like myself. I'm the co-founder of ModelOps. We provide a leading enterprise and comprehensive platform for ModelOps. And Josh is here too from another vendor. So we have ModSeep. So we have both practitioners and vendors here really focused on the impact of risk and governance in general for the overall model's journey within the large enterprise. And I think it's just an amazing. I know several of you, and I think what will be great is just really a conversation between you about your experience, both specifically within your organizations and also kind of broadly across the market, through your interactions with colleagues, or for us from a vendor, kind of we have a pretty good view across the market as well. So this is really exciting. I have some starting questions. But also, I just want to really encourage the audience to make it interactive. I will be monitoring questions that come in and try to weave those in as well. Okay, so just to start off, I'm just in no particular order. I'm just going to ask you each to provide a little bit of introduction about who you are and your organization, and then we'll just kind of get right into the conversation. So let's start with you, Jacob.
Great. Can you hear me, Stu? Great. Well, first, the views I express today are those of my views and not necessarily those of Regions Bank. So I am the head of model risk management and validation here at Regions Bank. Been in the role for about 7 years running model risk. Before that, I've had leadership roles in model development and credit review and some other areas. Within model risk, artificial intelligence risk management is a subdivision of our team. So the head of AI risk management reports to me, and that's a key part of us. And I'm looking forward to being on the panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Jerry?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Jerry Lavish. I'm a managing director in risk analytics, modeling and valuation at KPMG. Throughout my career in both capital markets and consulting, I've focused on quantitative modeling with a focus on model risk management as it relates to model development, performance, risk testing, controls, documentation, and validation. Over the past several years, I've worked on multiple engagements and pursuits that highlighted AI and machine learning models, especially as it relates to governance and overall model risk. Happy to be here. Look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. And Josh?
Yeah, hello, everyone. And Stu, thanks for inviting me today. My name is Josh Elliott, and I am a co-founder and COO of a model operations software platform called ModSeep. And I am truly looking forward to contributing to today's conversation and learning from you folks. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Josh. And Brad?
Hey, everyone. My name is Brad Seidler. I'm a director of model validation at KeyBank. I've been in this type of role for about 10 years, mostly with the technical practitioner of overseeing and evaluating models, especially those within fraud and consumer risk. So a lot of the ideas of ML and AI applications are coming in our domains. Thanks.
Great. And finally, Lorenko.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Lorenzo Miranda, I'm head of model risk management for the Société Générale operations here in the Americas. I've been working with machine learning for the past 30 years. I'm always in the quantitative finance analytics part of financial institutions since the 90s. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to answer any questions, and I'm looking forward to this chat.
Great. And Renko, I'm going to ask you to kind of kick off the first answer, but then I'm just going to invite everybody to kind of chime in as you see fit. The first question we have, you know, as we heard from Eric and from the last session, I think model ops as a capability, you know, really initially as organizations have had trouble getting models from data science into production, right? There's a lot of interaction or a bridge between kind of the data science organization and the IT organization. But then as models become, you know, decisioning assets for over a very long period of time, it's really the risk aspect that becomes as big, if not a bigger concern. You know, and so model ops starts to be a bridge between three major components, data science, IT, and risk. And so, you know, all of you have been involved in risk, or in the case of myself and Josh, kind of model ops in general, helping make that bridge between IT, data science, and risk for a long time. I mean, risk is something that your organizations and every organizations have been handling. There's been lots of different models, you know, types over the years. So it does appear, as we've heard already, and we see in the State of Model Ops report, that AI and ML present specific challenges to existing risk problems. And so that's kind of the broad question. As risk professionals, what's keeping you up at night regard to the impact of you know, AI initiatives compared to, you know, previous initiatives that had models as part of their journey? And Lourenco, let's just start with you, and then feel free to kind of chime in for the rest of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The question is it's actually one of the most important questions that we have to answer before starting anything. So start any implementation usage of any of these models. What happened is that for the past 30 years, I've been working this in AI since the 80s. It has been in a very dormant and only academic environment. It was very reserved for the academic environment until we have better computers, more data, the abundance of data, and it became what I call the democratization of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the data science profession. And I think it's brilliant because we've been waiting for this time for so long. Now it became a hype, became something that it's a must. So we want to implement that. We want to use that. So it's we see senior managers, my senior managers, saying, well, we have to use it. We have to automate. We have to optimize. We have to use that because the others are using. I think it's absolutely great. What happened is that when this cascades down to the organization, managers all over the place and people in the business, people in support functions, they start listening to that and say, well, I want to be first. I want to do it. I want to show that I am engaged. So I start hiring data scientists, which is absolutely great because we need the data science to come to the market. We need to bring them on board. I have students that I need to onboard as well. I need them to get employed, which is absolutely fantastic. When they get into the corporate world, especially in the bank, which is an extremely regulated place, they confront themselves with the reality. So now you have model risk managers to play a role. They have regulations. They have to pay attention to the implementation, the usage, and governance, etc. And this can cause an issue because I can hire a data scientist tomorrow. All of a sudden, this data scientist is downloading stuff from the internet, installing the computer, taking data from elsewhere, starting creating these models, and deploying them and making decisions out of that without a proper governance, without a systemic risk management view, a second line of defense, and independent view of those. And that's what keeps up at night. So today, As we speak, I can hear the data scientists. I can feel them developing models elsewhere that I'm not aware of. So not being aware of, not being part of the governance, the inventory, that's what concerns me. So we have one side, the hype, the innovation and the democratization, as I said, which we have to encourage, we have to support that. But at the same time, we have governance, we have a governance, we have a structure, we have systemic, we have inventory, so we have policies that we have to comply with because we work in an extremely regulated environment. So that balance between the hype and democratization and the governance, being able to identify and manage those risks, that's what keeps me up at night.
Great, thank you, Lorenco.
I could jump in a little bit there. So,
yeah. What keeps you up at night?
So for me, the area I spend the most time thinking about with the leadership team is talent strategy, because all the things Lorenco spoke about, as we evaluate those, it really comes down to what strategy do we have for talent? Specifically, are we putting the right associates in the right roles? So are there areas of the bank that want to use machine learning, consumer underwriting in the risk management, or fraud or anti-money laundering? And to one of the questions in the chat function, where are models owned? We, from a talent strategy point of view, we see that models are owned and being built, machine learning models throughout the bank, finance, risk, IT, specific data science departments. And so what really keeps me up at night is, are the associates in the right roles where they have the skills to be effective? They know model governance, they know model risk. When they're building data science models, they have a manager who appreciates compliance, who appreciates model governance, who appreciates the regulatory framework in which we operate. And before anyone builds models, from a talent strategy point of view, have we thought through a certification process? So when you join the bank, maybe you work in model risk for your first 3 months. Any data scientist, every single data scientist at the bank, if you want to build a model, well, let's figure this out. Model risk, let's say they're the best team for onboarding. If they work for 3 months doing validations, we onboard them, we train them, they learn an appreciation of regulatory guidance. They understand a sensitivity to compliance, about variables, about disparate impact, about fairness. They build relationships with compliance, with model risk. And after that 3 months or 4 months, whatever it might be, then fine. They can go to their area of the bank. They can go into fraud, and they go into anti-money laundering, they go into credit. And it really sets them up to mitigate a variety of these risks. Are they pulling open source code inappropriately? Well, now they know that. Are they going and building something from scratch that's duplicative? Well, now maybe through validating different models, they see the inventory. They know how to use the inventory as a source of business intelligence. And they, most importantly, have friends. They have friends throughout the bank. They have friends in validation. They have friends that are in that cohort. So the biggest thing that keeps me up at night is that the main solution I see to resolving most of this is every data scientist starts in model risk. Whether it's 1 month or 3 months or 5 months or 2 weeks, every bank can do it different. Any other solution, as we walk through, we try to do lunch and learns, we try to do trainings here, training there, doesn't really get, trainings aren't going to help you as much as actually doing it. And so all the concerns I see on fairness, on how we implement the models, all the risks are big, and this can't solve it all. But that's one of the big things to keep you up at night, is how to effectively create a talent strategy, a talent vision, and an effective rotation program that prepares associates to be more effective and more compliant in their eventual role.
Great, thank you.
I can layer on top of that as well. One of the things that keeps me up at night when we roll into a new client is the data pipeline. On a previous panel, they used the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Well, it's no different here. In order to be able to deliver a well-designed and implemented AI machine learning model, you have to make sure that you've constructed an equally well-designed and implemented data pipeline. It's not the most interesting part of data science, but it all starts with data engineering. Also, to add to the answer to Rajwinder's question around model governance, who owns it? Accountability. Who bears the responsibility for any AI-based outcomes? We've seen in the news Some of these algorithms and models have made decisions that have come under scrutiny. From a governance standpoint, we need to ensure that the business understands how to appropriately incorporate model outputs into business decisions. And to accomplish this, institutions have to construct clear and concise policies and procedures, approve methodologies, performance measures, and especially a robust escalation and remediation process to resolve any of these issues.
Great.
Exactly.
So I heard a couple things in the previous three that I think are really just consolidating one view, which is the people involved need to have clear expectations, right? So that can come from data, that can come from basically what are the expectations for testing and escalation, all of those. But really, I think the fundamental starting point is making sure that people have clarity of what is expected with different approaches. And that's why I think some of the principles that have been there for model risk management still apply within ML and AI. It's basically, how do you conceptualize a problem? How do you make sure it's suitable for the use? Compliance and all these other considerations, they're factoring in because of how we're using the models. So that's where I think really the core starting point should be, is that without a clarity of expectations, that could be, I think, to the original question, things that should be keeping the group up at night is if they think that they aren't there.
What question are you trying to answer, and is it the right question?
Yeah, great. And yeah, I'd love to get your perspective, because probably like us, you're getting it from across the industry of what you're being asked for at MODSI to provide. So it'd be great to hear kind of how that resonates or otherwise with what's been said so far.
Certainly, and as a founder and operator of a software company, what keeps me up at night is probably a little different than what we've talked about here. But I'll tell you what wakes me up every morning and what excites me. And I just want to paint a picture for the group here as well as the audience listening today. Is like, I want you to imagine that we're at a tipping point of where AI is becoming mainstream, with potentially trillions of models being run every day across every industry. Now, if that doesn't, get you excited, if you're an AI practitioner, I don't know what does, but building models isn't necessarily the hard part anymore. I think there are plenty of tools out there, open source and otherwise, that help the data science teams, no matter what their maturity, build really cool and exciting models. I think, Stu, what you opened up with, you were calling it a bridge. I call it the valley of death, right? Trying to get from an experimentation into a production system. I think that is exactly the challenge space that model operations can solve. But again, what excites me every morning is that I get to work with a team that is building solutions around some key challenge areas that we're starting to see pop up across organizations. And honestly, not all organizations know that they're going to face these. And I think they need to be constantly adapting their governance processes and policies to accommodate these new areas.
Right.
Like being able to deploy and govern models at scale, putting the model in the center of the design process and understanding how you integrate that into a production application. I think we're also, to the point about clarity around roles and expectations, we're asking our data scientists to be too many things at once.
Right.
They're not engineers. They're not experts at productionizing applications. So, what they're going into the design process with in terms of expectations and requirements are very different than what an engineer is going to look at and expect in terms of taking something to production. I think also once in production, again, with the model at the center of the design and the experience, how do you manage and monitor the models? Things like drift, things like explainability, and protecting models also from security risks like data poisoning and model theft. I think these are clearly areas that are coming more and more into focus and clarity for a lot of organizations and executives and leaders, especially those that are responsible for organizational risk, because at the end of the day, to the model governance question, it's the organization that owns the IP, right? And they have to be responsible for understanding what is being used inside their organization, how it's impacting their business and their value and their customers. And I think, I also agree that with Jerry that, I realize some organizations may not be ready for or mature enough for ModelOps types of solutions. But I really, challenge or even ask you to reconsider that, because I think the risk and cost of not thinking about model operations at the onset is going to be very expensive to correct in the later years.
Yep. I couldn't agree more, Josh, with all those. And just to kind of pull out at least 3 themes from the discussion so far that we're seeing pressure on in terms of capabilities within ModelOps Center, our software. It's inventory that came up. Like, what is the model? It's not just a data science asset. It's not just an IT asset. It's not just a risk asset. It's not just a business asset. It's all of those. So to be able to say what is a model in a production inventory compared to the 100 models that are happening in the science portion, but to be able to clearly define them is critical. And then the how do you educate? I love it. Like, does every data science, for when it was ModelOps, we've been doing this for a long time. For a while, the main pain point was just getting the model deployed into production. And then there was kind of a similar, like, hey, I think every data scientist should go work in software development and IT and see what the real kind of challenges are. And I love the idea of every data scientist also working in risk as they're kind of going forward. But really being able to show the life cycle, if you will, of a model. Like, how does a model relate to IT, security, risk, data science, and then data pipelines, right? Like, the data pipelines are on a per model basis. We've seen very small data models. We've seen models that need to be refreshed with respect to the data pipeline on weeks, months, or years, or, very fast streaming type model. There's such a diversity that when the model becomes the organizing principle and the life cycle is kind of defined first, then it's kind of clear how, the talent, the data, and the model inventory can kind of come together in a practice like ModelOps. So it's it's amazing to kind of hear the things that keep up, and I think it certainly resonates what we're seeing in the market in terms of what we're being pushed for. I'm sure that's sounds like the same for Josh and Mats.
Hey, Stu, can I add a point to that? So I think you hit on a very important concept, which is that there is a life cycle here.
Right.
We're in the governance and risk area. Each one of those parts, the data pipelining, the model development, the use case, the operations and monitoring, there's risks that we have to manage throughout the entire life cycle. And when we go to these AI and ML models and we adopt them more, and we have thousands of models, that's where each of one of those individual risks can aggregate, and it becomes a challenge if you're not very strategic about managing that as like a practice.
Yeah,
Brad, I think you're right. I'd like to suggest an alternative or maybe even a complementary perspective as well. Yes, it's an entire life cycle, but there's also, not every model is the same and not every use case is the same. And you have to balance, I think, the model and the application with the amount of governance that it needs to go through in terms of that life cycle. So thinking about the implications of what could go wrong if that model were in production, and making sure that you have the appropriate level of governance and controls in place, I think is also important.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. There's a question that came in. Man, we are getting a lot of questions, so I'm trying to partly go through them and also stay a little bit focused. I mean, we really do, I think, again, where in 2021, what we've seen, I think this is reflected in the State of ModelOps report, which is available to everybody who attended this conference. I think we're seeing risk as really rising to the top of the pain and concern for unlocking value in ModelOps. So I want to, since we have such distinguished risk professionals here, I just want to ask the question. Look, in your organizations, as you've already said, you've been managing risk with other types of models, traditional models, for decades. Kind of specifically, what are some of the challenges that AI models represent? Very specific compared to the kind of traditional models that your traditional model risk management practices have had to deal with going into 2021.
So for us, I mean, there's a lot there. But one is that to kind of one of the earlier points, the models are being retrained more often, more frequently. So we have to really step back and think through our governance process, that if our governance process was built 10 years ago for capital planning models, and capital planning models are now only 12, 13% of our whole inventory, or 12 or 13% of our hours, well then how do we make sure that our governance process and our AI risk management program, which again is within the model risk framework, how do we make sure that's nimble enough for when we see this proliferation of models? So we're seeing thousands of models. We're seeing faster retraining of models. And so I think part of it is, how do we reassess our governance program? And the other one is that as that's evolving, it kind of goes back to the talent strategy. So I'll tell a story. We set up a data science department here, and they were going to have a transformation. And I thought we had a validation manager on my team who was reporting to me. He had used to be an analyst, grew to be a manager. His name was Daniel Stahl, and he was a phenomenal validation manager, great direct report. And as the bank was moving towards AI, we thought, okay, who can lead our model platforms, right? And we kind of had a talent draft and said, this person's already learned validation. Previously had been in model audit at BB&T. He knew all the controls. So what we needed, if we were going to set up a model platform, somebody who had that experience, that model audit, that model risk management framework, as we were going to drive into the transformation of using more and more machine learning models. So we did that. Daniel now runs all the model platforms. He reports to the Chief Data Analytics Officer, and it could not have been a better fit. It's definitely the best use of his talent for our enterprise and on behalf of our shareholders. And so when I think through, as banks are going to make that transition, to really make sure that you're putting in associates who have model audit experience, model validation experience, and of course all the technical experience, the guy's brilliant, but have those other experiences, so when you drive towards a model ops environment, they have the right framework and perspective.
So maybe I can. It's actually a brilliant idea. So I'm gonna. I myself benefited in my career of having this rotation, and
right.
And I agree with you 100%, Jacob, that that's the way to go. And I myself do road shows and talk to the developers, but that's not enough. I'm
right.
100% with you. It's not enough, because you have to repeat and repeat and repeat, and then they change, and then the rotation there is also big. So I'm with you, Jacob, and it's also a nice retention mechanism. You have a success case in your team that's perfect. One thing that we've been doing here as well, in order to adapt your question, original questions, to related to the existing models, more established, let's call the credit, the statistically based or the pricing models that we've been used to it. We have a very clear process that we know in the development what are the processes, and when you validate, we know that we follow these processes, we have the final conclusion. Well, this model is good for use or not. In machine learning, what we're trying to do is to separate the development and all these different stages of development into mechanisms that could be modular. So in a sense, a big difference that we've been seeing is in terms of the comparison between statistical models and machine learning models that are it's in the development, how to translate the nomenclature that we had before and the ones that we have in SR11 and S7, that's our right, where we fall back onto in terms of what is conceptual soundness, what is ongoing monitoring, what is output analysis, what is sensitivity analysis. One of the things that a very practical example, I was reviewing, my team was reviewing, I'm just a cheerleader, so we were reviewing a compliance model to reduce false positives. And they were using a gradient boosting machine, very sophisticated, amazing approach, very nice design. And when we are going to do the validation, we wanted to use the same concepts that we had before. Sensitivity analysis, now you're doing your feature engineering. How does that apply to feature engineering? How does that apply to hyperparameter optimization? If you start playing with your hyperparameters, you can change the model itself. So you can go from this type of solution to a different type of solution that in your ranking of solutions was one of the solutions that you could have used. But now if you have a hyperparameter optimization and you start playing with that, maybe your ranking changed. So how do you manage that? Because if you have a logistic regression in a PD model, if you change the parameters, the logistic regression continues there. You decided to have a model from the beginning, you stick to it. But in a machine learning world, in the data science, the GBM that I had before could have changed, or my feature engineering could have changed from this method to another method. And that's something that we've been facing, and how to translate that. And it goes back to your point, Jacob, that the developers, they don't have this experience, this mindset of challenging their development. And sometimes we have to do, we become the quality control of that. And then they don't understand, and they say, wow, that doesn't make any sense, because, so we have to start this educational part that you mentioned, which is really important. The translation between reality and SR11-7 and what we did before is it's a big challenge that we're facing today.
I can use monitoring a step further. And one of the areas that we see in a lot of our clients would be a lack of interpretability measures and metrics. Josh had alluded to, explainability, but interpretability is every bit as important. And the ability to identify the drivers of the model outputs that influence the decision-making. Institutions really need to embed these interpretability metrics in a model testing and monitoring procedures and update that control environment accordingly. With a traditional model, even with an algo trading model, how it takes an input, processes it to an output is easily observable, and we can interpret, why that outcome occurred. However, for most machine learning models, they're essentially black boxes. Yeah, there's a core logic, but it can be difficult to fully discern or even justify how or why a model takes an input and produces a specific output. These interpretability metrics need to be incorporated into the entire model governance process, with an eye towards key ethics and regulatory risks. When I talk about, AI and machine learning model interpretability measures and metrics, some of them include, feature importance with an eye towards statistical significance, the rank order of the standalone predictive features, feature interaction, how it measures the predictive value of interdependency among features, ICE or individual conditional expectation, measures the predictive impact given a set of all of the features. You can do a PD plot, partial dependence plot to measure the marginal predictive effect of a feature. And then you could also add another measure, LIME, local interpretable model agnostic explanation. And there you're utilizing linear models to locally approximate any nonlinear model performance.
Hey, if I could comment just quickly on that, what you were sharing, Jerry, right there. I think that, there is an audience that understands every single word that you just talked about. And then there is an entire, community of users that don't even understand what an F1 score is or what any of these performance metrics are. And I do think that there's some education that needs to take place within organizations to bring that understanding, up to a level of digital literacy. But, to the point about transparency, interpretability, explainability, I think, this is partially the trickiest part of machine learning and artificial intelligence today. And, different stakeholders have different needs related to all those things. And I think, if you think about an audit trail or the ability to explain results to a business leader to determine the ROI, those needs are very different. And there are solutions out there that provide some level of explainability. There's open source solutions. Monzi has a capability as well. But allowing users, if we put the model in the center, but also put the end user and the application in that conversation as well, and give them the ability to learn about how to test a model or understand what a model does and what the outputs look like, and be able to test drive that model to understand, maybe I supply it my data and I get a different type of response, and maybe that model needs to be retrained or needs to be versioned or create a different version of that model for my particular business need. But I think there's an education component that we need to identify and recognize and make sure that we're working towards.
No, I mean, that's a great point, Josh. I mean, we talked about educating the teams, but I think educating up is every bit as important. You know, the people that are writing the checks, and especially in the financial services industry where I work, you know, getting the business to put capital at risk into a machine learning and AI model where they don't really know how it works or where the results come from. It all starts with the education. I agree.
It does, and to get to adoption, you got to have trust, and to have trust, you have to have that transparency.
Absolutely.
So
Brad, did you want to chime in there?
On this one a little bit. So I really think that part of the discussion I agree with. Like, you need to understand how interpretability might impact, but I think we're thinking of it maybe in different contexts. I think you need to consider how that model is being used and use that as the core guidance for all of these decisions, right? So do I need the same level of interpretability? Do I need to be able to explain this to different levels of business leaders? Because with AI and ML models, you have a lot of different applications and a lot of different risk levels. Some of those have a very, very high need for interpretability. Other ones do not. And if you don't necessarily take that into consideration, especially from the governance and risk lens, I think you enter into these considerations where you're doing testing and you might produce results that may not be as easily interpretable or guiding you forward, but really you've lost maybe the purpose of doing that test. You're doing it to basically enable decisions faster and better. And I think that without that kind of guidance to say, these are the things that are most critical for my model, it guides me to then select a methodology, so select what type of testing I need at different times. And those are really, I think, much more important for guiding these processes and helping to say, this is what I need, and this is how I orchestrate that and support it. So I get the challenge with ML AI, but I also think that how we use it is one of the most important facets about managing that from a risk and what we need to do with it.
Well, that goes back to your original point around model selection and are we asking, what is the question we're trying to answer, and is it the right question? And you know, I think it all ties together, right?
Yep, on a per model basis. And we have about 6 minutes left, so I want to be cognizant of time. We certainly, and that's a big theme that keeps coming up. Each model has its own journey and its own relationship. And you know, like with traditional model risk management types, things like population score stability and characteristic stability and model discrimination power and lift, and you know, cumulative good and bad percentage across score points and those types of things, you know, that may or may not, to Brad's point, be appropriate for every single model. So it's like how we take the best of the different areas and apply them to the specific model becomes the overall theme. And I think that is, again, that role of ModelOps to be able to provide that bridge on a per model basis. So I have 2 more questions I'd love to get off. The last question is going to be, what would you say to a colleague who's starting on the journey? So just start thinking about that. But the question that's come up in the audience several different ways is about organizational structure, right? And so the question that Kevin Daly said is, in an environment where models are built anywhere in the organization, what organization would sponsor and champion the use of a formalized model operations capability? Model risk, IT, each individual business unit, or other? That is a general industry question. Again, I think the ModelOps State of ModelOps survey that's available to anybody who is attending this conference goes into some of the answers to that from a survey perspective, but it'd be great to get quickly, again, we have 4 minutes left, quickly, you know, where do you see ModelOps as a capability living in your organization?
So I'll say one thing quickly, is that to get that answer, I think it's important to pull down your leaders regularly. So every Thursday at 9 a.m. every single week, we have a meeting called the Quantitative Resource Alignment Working Group. It's not the Model Governance Committee. We never talk about specific models, but it's resource alignment. To our point is, where should these models sit? Where should this talent sit? Which talent should go here? Which model should go there? Who should handle model implementation? Who should IT handle something? Should data handle something? And there's a forum, as opposed to different groups kind of figuring it out themselves. We have a standing meeting Thursday morning, every 9 a.m. every Thursday, and you can work through those. And it helps you realize there's wildly different views. I should implement my own models. No, somebody else should implement it. There should be centralized model ongoing monitoring. No, there shouldn't be. Machine learning should be everywhere. No, it should only be in one spot. And allows you to work through those and figure out the right answer. So to the answer of Rajvinder's question, it can really depend, but the key is to get buy-in. And then after the meeting, even though we might disagree for that hour, we all walk out agreeing or at least publicly agreeing to everybody in the team. Okay, we've made a decision. This is how we're going to approach model ops. And so I think having a forum separate from your model governance committee where you can flesh this out, set up, get agreement, and then execute is really going to be important.
I agree. Exactly what Jacob said, and it's about accountability. You know, it's all the above. Certain different aspects of the model lifecycle and the models are owned by different groups. You know, data might be owned by technology. The model might be owned by the business. If you're going to implement any interpretability measures or metrics, that might be owned by compliance. You know, it could be spread across the organization. But most importantly, to Jacob's point, is it needs to live with the right organization or group in the company that can drive it and further it and make sure that it's done correctly and properly. And then at the very high level, tone from the top. You got to make sure that it comes straight down from the top, that everybody's empowered to deliver exactly what they need to deliver.
Yeah. Brad?
And I agree there's an important need for a cross-functional dependency, because this intersects with technology need and orchestration. And if you really want to achieve the efficiency opportunities with rapid deployment, you need to have kind of a unified vision.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean every model is the same, but a vision of how to do that successfully. And without that, you run into many pitfalls. You just lose the opportunity that's really there. Just on the last point about where does it sit? It sits with our data science and line of business teams, but model risk management and technology have some oversight or support requirements.
Great. Lorenko?
I'm probably going to answer your question related to the new joiners and the people that are just arriving in the profession. That's what I tell my students. They are people that are getting into the profession and being trained for that. What I tell them, and I'll tell all the people that work with me, is get the content, define the problem, and understand the content, understand the problem that you're addressing. I think what's happening today, people are very much interested in the process instead of the content, and then they apply methods that they don't really understand. So today I ask my team to open the box and understand what the components are, instead of just understanding a bunch of tools and Pythons and pandas and numpys and all this stuff. It's great. I think it's absolutely essential, but go back to basics, understand the concept, understand the problem that you're addressing. Otherwise, you become a specialist in the technology instead of specialist in solving a problem.
Right.
Great. We're actually out of time. That was awesome. I think we could have easily, talked together and had a conversation for another hour. I think everyone, most of us are going to be at this meet and greet speakers in a little bit. And I just say to the last point, I don't want to put words in Josh's mouth, but both ModC and ModelOps are doing a lot to educate and really help more people understand what the challenges are that you guys are articulating. So to your point, Lorenko, I think it's a lot easier today in 2021 for professionals to educate themselves on how to address some of these issues. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was tremendous. And I look forward to this whole community keeping this conversation going, for not only this year, but for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
I can't hear Catherine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back for our final panel discussion today before we head into our final session of the speaker meet and greet at 1 p.m. So this panel discussion is all about why traditional model moderating, goodness me, put my teeth back in for that one, isn't good enough. And this session is going to be moderated by David Trier, who is smiling away at me. So I'm going to bring him up onto stage. So welcome to you, Dave, who is the VP of Product from ModelOps. So Dave, if you would like to take it away, I will bring forward your brilliant panelists.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay, Catherine? Great. Well, thanks everyone, and welcome. What an incredible event, the first ever ModelOps Summit. I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Dave Trier. I'm the VP of Product for ModelOps. I help oversee the strategy and direction for our ModelOps software that we call ModelOps Center. So I'm incredibly excited to be joined here by, as you can already see, an esteemed panelists of seasoned executives, practitioners, really talking about a challenging topic within the overall AI program, which is related to why traditional model monitoring is not enough. So Anthony, Brian, Jacob, Glenn, John, it's really a pleasure to have you today. So I'm going to allow each of you to introduce yourself, give a brief overview of your background and title, and then we'll get started. So I'll start with you, Anthony.
Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here today. Anthony Sepsi, partner at KPMG, about 25 years capital markets, started in structured finance. I've really spent my whole career around analytics with a real heavy emphasis in credit risk. And I've worked through the CCAR, CECL, IFRS 9. So glad to be here today.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. And Brian.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks for having me on the panel. Very excited to be part of the conversation here. I am a senior manager within our quantitative advisory services team. I too have been around the quantitative modeling space for quite some time now, and now have been transitioning the last few years into driving some of the governance aspects around AI and machine learning. So excited to share some insights here.
Great, thanks, Brian. And Jacob, welcome back. I know you're on the prior panel, but for those that weren't on the prior session, perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Thanks, Dave. First, any views I say today are those of mine and not necessarily those of Regions Bank. So I'm the head of model risk management and validation here at Regions Bank. Been in that role about 7 years. Prior to that, I had leadership roles in model development and credit review. Our department, just a little background for this session, artificial intelligence risk management, that's a function, that's a group that rolls up under me, that rolls up under model risk. And so I think that'll be relevant as we talk a little bit later today. So thanks for having me.
Awesome, thanks, Jacob. And Glenn.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to learn about what everybody's doing in ModelOps, and there's a lot going on in the space. And thank you for inviting me. I'm the Director of Machine Learning Research and Innovation at American Family Insurance, and I have been doing machine learning, for more than 20 years, since it was more an academic exercise at the beginning, and I'm excited to be lucky to be in the field.
Awesome. Glad to have you here, Glenn. And last but not least, John Shaw. John, can you introduce yourself, please? Oh, you might be on mute, John. A little technical difficulties, so I'm not able to hear you yet, John.
Yeah, looks like we're having some technical difficulties. John, I'll pop a message in the chat.
Great. Well, why don't we go and get started, and hopefully John will get his audio soon here. So again, really exciting topic that we're going to be covering today. We've just had some incredible speakers and panelists up to this date, but this today is all about model monitoring. We've heard through the sessions today that models, they've been around for decades, right? They've been monitored, they've been governed, they've been used for production decisioning. But what's different, right? What's different is that AI in general has really forced organizations to rethink how they monitor models. So I'd actually like to start, Jacob, with you, and perhaps we could just talk a little bit about when you think about what needs to be updated, what that next generation of model monitoring, inclusive of AI monitoring, what does that really entail? What do you expect a model monitoring capability to encompass and more importantly, to achieve?
Great question, Dave. So on model monitoring here at Regions, we break it into 3 categories. There's the data monitoring, and our model risk team tests that. There's the model performance monitoring, and our team tests that. And there's the production monitoring. I would say under the traditional sense of model risk, we were really good at model performance monitoring, and we were not as good on the data monitoring and the production monitoring. And now that we've seen, a variety of risks with machine learning models, both on the data side, including those related to kind of bias and fairness, and the work we've been doing around there on various metrics of fairness, still doing model performance monitoring, which is still very important. We're still seeing, overfitting and other concerns with models. And the productionalization, and this is where your firm and others help a lot, is how to really think through productionalization of the models and what model risk in partnership with IT risk management, great partner, how we monitor, how we handle that type of monitoring. And then the second part of how I think through monitoring is staffing. And I spoke about that a little bit on the previous panel, that you really want to make sure that the associates with the right skills are in the right roles. And sometimes the associate might be hired, she or he, into role A, but really the biggest need for the bank is for them to be in role B, or that aligns with their skills the most, or that aligns with their interests. Or maybe it's like an apprenticeship in a way. They can go to a team that's stronger in a certain area, stronger in Python, while their other team's a little better in SAS. And they have the ability to really be a machine learning engineer, to really be a data scientist. And so when I think through model monitoring, one thing that really helps us is to make sure we have associates in roles that understand model monitoring, have seen best practices throughout the firm, have seen lagging practices too, and know what's expected of model risk, either because they worked in model risk or their manager worked in model risk or whatever before they're in data science. So that's really important. 3 elements of model monitoring: data, model performance, and production, and it all ties back to a talent strategy. And if you can get that right, a lot of these other things we'll talk about today, I believe, will come in place.
Oh, that's incredible, Jacob. That was a great summary around it. So thank you so much. And it actually reminds me, if those that were able to attend Eric Brethenau's keynote, really was thinking about what's important, what needs to be done. You need to ensure there's stability of those models, accountability of those models, and everything that entails, all the different parts that you talk about, Jacob, fairness, and ultimately business performance, right? Those are decisioning assets that are being used for a reason. But if I turn, Brian, to you, to the next question as part of this, as we think about it and what we've seen with our customers, and I'm sure you're seeing it within your organization, there's a growing number of models used, but there's also a growing complexity of those models, whether there's different languages, new frameworks, combination of internal models, third-party models, models that are embedded in different SaaS and other platforms, software as a service and other platforms. So what challenges are you seeing as it relates to model monitoring?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, a big challenge. I think some of this, if we think about how this relates back to traditional risk management, if you will, there isn't certainly a growing number of models to be considered, but one of the aspects to think about too is the actual use of some of these models and how you can align the monitoring to appropriate levels based on the levels of risk that you've been assessed about. So some of the uses of the model may actually inform a more tedious type of monitoring that's more frequent analysis, maybe more metrics to inform particular responses. And some may be lower use case risk from that perspective as well. So as you're thinking about, particularly to your question about the growing number of models in the inventory, which certainly is becoming quite a bit of interest here, I think if we ground ourselves kind of thinking through what it is we're actually using the models for, it will inform the level of specificity around some of the monitoring, as well as the groups that you need to correspond with in making sure the metrics or assessment of monitoring is also understood appropriately.
That's fantastic, Brian. And we're definitely going to hit a little bit more on both what you and Jacob mentioned around the organization and who's accountable for that in a second. But Glenn, I'd love to turn it to you and get a little bit of your perspective on any additional challenges that you're seeing, both as you start to take on, use, develop, adopt, and leverage AI models. Any other additional challenges that haven't already been talked about here?
Yeah, I totally agree with Jacob. I think that was a great summary. The way that I see it is pretty similar to that. I mean, I think as a matrix where, two other rows are application performance monitoring, but that's true for any kind of application that you have, right? Like how long it's taking for every prediction. You get into the economy of time prediction and how much it costs for each prediction, and if it's timely for the downstream applications that you need it for. And also, there is something that is exclusively more important for machine learning deployment models. There are what is saying like model drift, out of data distribution. That is something that is very important for me because you get these models where we have very powerful models right now, and there is the whole story about these models that can be fooled by oppositional efforts. Like you have a model that try to, for example, imaging models that try to describe animals. Sometimes people put a little sticker in a car of a turtle, and the model says it's a turtle, right? So those kind of monitoring to check that the data is out of distribution is something that is very active in the research community right now. We're working with a couple of partners in the research community in order to see which one of those learnings can we put into some of the models that we had into production. And the third tier that I think it kind of cover those two, will be like the columns of these little metrics, is the data, right? Because we tend to talk about model monitoring with the word model, but the data, of course, is a big part of that.
Right.
I agree,
thank you,
Glenn.
Yeah, and I think there's actually a question that came in for the audience. Hopefully, John, your audio is back. But they asked, can you elaborate on production monitoring? What do you actually monitor in production? So, John, maybe I'll ask that you take that first. John, is your audio back? Hopefully. Maybe not. Okay. Jacob, I think the direction was actually directed at you to take that question. Again, the question was, what do you actually monitor in production, and as part of your opening?
Right, and I'll give a little answer, but then I'll hand it over to others on this. So a big part, again, is performance drift, right? Is the model being used and performing as expected? And I think there's a variety of things, right? A model will be built for a certain use, and then we're applying it for a different use. And this is a concern that we often see. Let me tell a story here. So there was a vendor who came to us, and they said, we're going to help you figure out nefarious actors that are trying to steal customers' accounts, right? We're going to help solve your customer authentication problem. And we said, great. And they said, you know what we can do? We know when a customer calls in, if they're using AT&T or Verizon on their phone, and we can compare it against what they normally use. And that'll help us figure out fraud. And we said, amazing. They'll say also, we can keep track of when they're using their app, if their phone is moving or if it's stationary. We compare that against their normal. I said, amazing. They said, oh, we also know if the caller is calling in and the background noise is not what's expected. We said, amazing. Then they said, we can even tell if the call, when they're calling in or using the app, if they're on a prepaid or a subscription call. And that'll help us figure out if it's a fake customer. We said, amazing. So we buy the vet model. Model validation goes to validate it. And we say to the line of business, we don't keep any of the data that you want to compare this against. We don't keep if our customer is using AT&T or Verizon. We don't keep if it's Apple or Android. We don't know that about any of our customers. We don't know what the normal background sound is. We don't know if it's prepaid or subscription. We don't know if their phone is moving. And so I know I'm answering a different question, but I wanted to share that story from a model risk point of view, is that sometimes you have these vendors that are pitching this amazing machine learning. We'll compare it against the expected customer, and you'll see, oh, they're logging in with AT&T, they're using it on Verizon, it's fraud. If you don't actually know your data, you don't know your processes, we don't collect that data, maybe on purpose, maybe on accident, I don't know. But we do not know what type of device you use. We're just not capturing that. Or if we do, we don't know it a minute later. There's nowhere that's saved here. And so when we think about machine learning, I think a big thing we think through is, can we push back on the vendor when they say, oh, we have this, we'll keep track of performance? Do we really have the data? Do we really have the process? So that's a different question, different answer to a different question, but maybe I'll hand it on to the other guys to answer more on production monitoring.
Yep.
There we go, John, we can hear you. Yes, welcome,
oh my
John.
Goodness. All right. Well, I'm John Shaw, by the way. So I work for AWS, and I cover global customers in healthcare, life sciences, and high tech, the cloud space since 2006. Obviously, even with all the AI that I do today, I still can't operate my mic. So there you go. Yeah, this kind of when you're monitoring models in production, there's four ways or four types of monitoring that you need to look at. So you want to monitor your data quality. You want to monitor your model quality, your bias drift in the model itself, and then the feature attribution drift. So they're the four key ways. And when you're monitoring these, you have to have a strategy around those, right? So data quality really goes back to your data lake or data, lake house or whatever your data strategy is for your business, and how you're feeding that data into the model. And I think some of the other panel have already alluded to, there's bad actors out there that try different things with the model as the data is getting sent in. But having a strategy with constraints and other things around the data as it's going in the model is really important. And then having a firm baseline with your with metrics of that model when you're doing the actual model quality checks, right? So before you put a model in production and you're measuring under the curve or that F1 score, whatever, what is that model prediction piece? And the bias drift is really important as well, because bias can happen for a number of reasons. So, when you're building the model, you might have with your training data not as many class imbalances. So things like maybe you train like a credit risk on a certain population of people, but when you go into production, you're trying it against another population, and that was a key feature importance for the model. So monitoring that bias drift is really important too. And that the last piece is that feature attribution, and we've seen it a lot with our customers at AWS. They go down this path of a feature store, which is like a new kind of way of looking at your data and getting it prepped and ready for machine learning and sharing features across your models. Having a strategy around actually monitoring individual feature attribution is important, because those individual features obviously make up one or many or thousands of models. So being aware of that when you're putting models in production. So they're the four types that I would look at when you're monitoring.
Yeah, no, John, that's fantastic, and I think that covers a good portion of it as well. And if I may, I might actually add that with our customers and what we've seen in the use of our software is there's actually a couple additional categories, and one of which is, I'll turn to Anthony here in a second around this, is around the risk monitoring, right? So many of those items play into what the compliance second line teams are wanting to look at. But now with the advent of AI, and those models are degrading much more quickly, we're starting to see the need for more continuous feedback loop into the second line teams and making sure that we're monitoring the various metrics that second line teams want to see. And I'll ask you to talk about that in a second, Anthony. But the last category I throw out is also around process monitoring, right? So we heard a little bit earlier around making sure that to get to scale, I think it was one of the panelists early on, to get to scale, talking about the need to have automation and model ops to get to scale. And that includes the process monitoring. Do you have the right gates and steps in the process before you get it out to production? And once it's in there, is all of those model life cycles, all those processes being properly monitored to ensure that all the gates and controls from a compliance perspective are in place? So those are just a couple additional categories. But Anthony, I'd like to turn to you to talk a little bit about how with AI, the need to have more continuous feedback loop, a continuous monitoring back with second line teams.
Yeah, Dave, no, absolutely. And I mean, I just don't want to come across as cliche with all the model, experts on the call and in attendance, but we all know models are all wrong. I love this quote: all models are wrong and some are useful. And then I saw another brilliant quote recently by a Google AI professional on the definition of today's AI, and it's a machine that can make a perfect chess move while the room is on fire. So we all know that these models have inherent risk. A big part of the risk process has been, since SR 11.7 came on the Financial Services Institution, is validation, which in many ways, we've done a lot of work at our firm in helping companies with that function. It's very much I feel like it's almost a financial statement audit. As you take a snapshot of the model, you replicate a lot of the calculations, assess the data, and you kind of sign off on the model at that point in time. But with these AI machine learning models, and I think in general with any sort of models, especially in financial services industry, when you talk about dynamic capital markets and consumer behavior, it's this monitoring process. And the more timely and more pervasive that can be, I think you ultimately get a real, that's an excellent risk factor or a way to manage risk. I mean, at the heart of AI machine learning models is basically, it's a trial and error process with a classical conditioning approach. So these are models that need to constantly be, I think, assessed for bias drift, as we stated here, and for performance and whether or not it's meeting the requirements and expectations that have been stated. And that requires, in many instances, a very solid, timely, dynamic monitoring process, because these models they're extremely complex, not well understood, and as a result of that, you really got to continuously, I think, reassess, are you achieving your business objectives? I think a big misconception about AI models right now is it is a plug and play technology that can immediately drive abnormal returns. So it's where on the flip side, it's in more of a constant iteration discipline where you're constantly making incremental small changes based on what you study, what your performance is telling you, what your monitor is telling you. You go back to the algo, you make some subtle changes. I mean, for example, I've been in the mortgage sector for 25 years, and prepayment speeds. We came off of the pandemic where the 10-year Treasury was at 60 basis points. In the last quarter or so, it went up to about 170 basis points. So it was a big move. Interest rates going up, the economy getting better. It was amazing to me how many large banks, real sophisticated mortgage prepayment shops, missed prepayments by 50, 60%. And it was a very classic fence sitters, they're waiting for the rates to bottom out and go ahead and refinance. They figured, hey, we were at the bottom of the rate cycle and everybody jumped in, yet these very sophisticated prepayment models still miss this. And you learn that through a monitoring process. So I think it's the timeliness of that model. I think a lot of great comments about data, because as we all know, I mean, a good model starts with an excellent data set. And the problem with data, it is backwards looking, it's historical, it's very susceptible to prejudices, biases, obsolescence, even evolution of social, political, economic changes, especially in the technology world that we live in today. Consumer behavior changes almost at a flick of the switch. And having that monitoring device in place where you're constantly comparing what I predicted to what actually happened, and then having a forensics mindset to go in and investigate what caused the problem, and then have that circular loop back to development with MRM, I think is a real critical piece of the evolution of model risk management, if you will.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, that's 100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. And I'm just curious, you really touched on a little bit around the organizations and the teams involved as part of this. So maybe Jacob, I can turn to you to talk a little bit about how you're seeing, whether within your organization or elsewhere, how that feedback loop is making its way to different teams. Some of the monitors, the metrics that we're talking about, how does that feed to different MRM teams, whether it's first line, data scientists, quants, et cetera? How are you seeing that evolve, especially as you're getting more and more detailed information and metrics?
Yeah, great question. So I'll tell a story from about a year ago. So it was March 2020. We were validating a fraud model, thousands of features. But when we were doing the validation, we saw the most predictive feature for this is a fraud transaction model, credit card and debit card transaction model, trying to predict if the transaction was fraudulent, right? So the most predictive variable was if the customer historically had card present during their transaction, and now it was a card not present. So historically, 80% of the transactions over the last year, the card was present. Now, over the today's transaction, the card was not present. Next transaction not present. You're seeing 3-4 in a row, card not present. That in the model flags it's fraudulent, right? So our team looked at this, and this is before we had stay-at-home orders in our state in Alabama, but our customers are throughout the country, throughout the Southeast, but throughout the country. And our team saw, wait a minute, is this still going to be predictive? We're going into stay-at-home orders and safer-at-home orders. So they challenged that and said, to Anthony's point, this model was based on historical data, where historically people didn't all of a sudden go from card present to card not present behavior. It was a gradual change, and now the model was seeing huge amounts of false positives. card transactions are getting frozen, and our fraud investigators, and there's only a finite amount of them, were getting overwhelmed with false positives, with extra work, and the customers were having a frustrating experience by having their transactions frozen online and being accused of fraud, right? And so this is an example where, to Anthony's point, the future is not the same as the history. The model was built on a certain behavior. Even speaking with my mom, she said, I bought clothes online for the first time in her whole life. And I was like, oh, Mom, you're breaking all the bank's models. Like, no one thought that would happen. Yep. 78 years old. Yeah. So I think with this story, then our team gave that feedback. And I think what really helped, it helped us build model risk. There's always the question, can we add value in this AI space? It's different. Our team might historically have been economists. We're saying, now we're more computer scientists and economists. We're really showing we can add value in the space. And I think this example, which went all the way up to the CEO and the executive leadership team, could say, whoa, like you do need to step back. There needs to be a human involvement. While we have automated a lot of our validation tests, we've embedded them within the model development platform. We have a lot of unit tests we've embedded. We've probably automated 40, 45% of our validation activity. Still, there is, 55, 60% of our work is still manual. A human's looking at the model, looking at the variables and saying, I don't know if this makes sense. And we can give feedback in the line of business is like, oh my God, thank you. It was tough re-estimating the model since this new behavior, but we pulled from New York, we pulled from Seattle, we pulled from other areas where the stay-at-home orders went in first. We saw that behavior. You could buy that data from third-party, credit bureaus, and we re-estimated the data using very recent data in geographic locations that had the earlier stay-at-home orders, not necessarily our footprint. Our footprint, of course, had the latest part of the country to have stay-at-home orders. I'm in the Southeast, so I think it really helped us kind of prove the value of model risk and to prove that kind of step back and say, where can I add value? And that doesn't substitute, but it complements all the automated testing libraries that we've already embedded and the automated validation work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Jacob. And John, I'll invite you to add some commentary in a second. But we're seeing the same things. Our customers or potential prospects are really just kind of teetering on the edge of, do I need to do this model monitoring comprehensive thing now? I don't think I need it yet, right? I don't need to make sure I have everything monitored, all the different aspects, the compliance, the business, the technical risk. But to your story is a perfect one to counteract that, to balance that and say, well, listen, here's what could go wrong if you don't have this comprehensively in place. John, maybe I think you had a comment that you wanted to jump in on.
Yeah, sure. So really, machine learning is in most organizations that we work with is really a team sport, right? So having the right data engineer role, a wrangler, having the the data scientist, the operations person is really important, and having that those roles and responsibilities clearly defined is important. So the model is just an endpoint, and it is a famous kind of a graph of ML in the middle with all the different supporting pieces, and it's a really small component. But a lot of companies that we've worked with, again, they're trying to build this capability, and there's sometimes that even though data science is a different concept, it's really some of it should be treated like software. And when you put in anything to production, you need to think about the safeguards. How do you put in production? How do you swap out that endpoint? How do you monitor that endpoint? Thinking about like canary deployment, blue-green deployment when you're doing that. And then you really want your expensive data scientists, really smart people, to not do like first line support, right? You want those guys to do the hard problems in your organization. So having that team sport approach, even have automation around fixing common issues with data drift or model drift will really help. And then having that third line, which is the data scientist that originally created the model, to be able to reproduce that issue, right? And then really create that approach before the data drift hits. It won't be in my opinion, the data drift will not be an immediate thing. Real catastrophe that the model is driven on. It'll be like a gradual thing. So machine learning's practices that will monitor the data drift that is coming from these models, you can actually calculate a good baseline of when that model is going to go out of compliance. and then having that, that process behind it. So definitely, my takeaway with continuous model is not have one guy wear 10 hats. If you can find that unicorn, tell me. But if you can get that person and the team to actually work together when they're doing their data science, is really important to scale machine learning.
Yeah, and just I'll invite Glenn to jump in with a comment here in a second, but I'm reminded of what Jody Blomberg mentioned on a prior discussion where she said model ops is the key to scale, right? And exactly your point, John. Data scientists are really good at building models, right? But they don't need to be involved in the day-to-day plumbing, right? They don't need to be involved in the day-to-day operations and plumbing. That's where model ops, and particularly model ops software, is able to actually help to get them out of the day-to-day operations, out of the plumbing, and into do what they do very well. Glenn, I know you wanted to jump in with your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment. I think something related to Jacob's story as well is explainable AI. So right now, it's more like an academic exercise, and I know we have some methods that live on top of the model to try to explain predictions at the at the prediction level. More classical models as we know it. If we're doing fraud models, stuff that are linear in nature, we can see what features are more important in general, but not at the prediction level. So some features might not be super relevant as a whole, but in a prediction, if you get somebody up, if something depends on a characteristic that is really high, even when the feature in general is not important, you want to know that at the prediction time, just to know, kind of explaining what things are happening, right? We are making a lot of progress on that in the science part. So there is a lot of research and a lot of advancement of academics trying to figure out how to explain and the new generation of attention-based models that we see in this in NLP, but it's now being applied to different things. Is one of that. Again, it's just the ability to predict not only what features are important in the whole, but for that specific prediction, what features are making that prediction the way it is it positive or negative or whatever the prediction it is. And then I think something in the future is how to monitor not only the model performance, but the model explanations, and see, how we can monitor that. Yes. And have, and that will be great help for auditing the model moving forward, or is something is happening. So that will be a component that it will be coming up, I think, in the next couple of years.
Oh, great point, Glenn. I totally agree. It's all about, again, not just the statistical, technical performance monitoring, but holistic monitoring, including ethical fairness, interpretability, explainability, business impact, process monitoring. All of that is incredibly important to get that holistic view for these just really core decisioning assets for the company. Brian, as we were talking about all these different types of things that need to be monitored, curious about your perspective on what you're seeing around who's involved in helping to define what monitors need to be built? What are the thresholds around those monitors? Who and how is that involved, from based on what you're seeing? Different teams, I would imagine, have to get into that particular process.
Absolutely, Dave. And I think a few of the comments made so far actually are critically important into this question as well. In that there are different places within the organization, or different places that touch the modeling aspect, that have certain views that need to be incorporated here. So as the model is created and it actually developed, there is an understanding of what the intention of the model actually is. So what's the outcome, the business use of the model. So really the understanding of how to assess whether the model is performing appropriately would come a lot from that development aspect and consideration there. So defining exactly what that means, what is a success criteria, what type of considerations need to be considered within the development process should play into that decision of how to actually monitor the model as well. And then from more of a review type of approach, there's also the considerations of, now that they have an understanding of what it is that they're attempting to predict, and therefore will create some monitoring against it, somebody needs to check it, right, on the back end and say, okay, so now that we've understood what you defined as an appropriate outcome and how we will understand how that starts to drift over time, that's where some of the validation functions will come into play and say, let's review what you believe to be a continuing successful AI-based prediction, and make sure you're not missing something. But I would say, just to reiterate some of the points about the data itself and some of the business intuition, economic intuition is critically important as well. Because if you are creating a metric that is updating based on continuing data feeding to it, obviously the model prediction is going to continue to improve. So it has to have that thought process there about considerations of overfitting and making sure it's going to be predictive, even in a structural shift in the data when you're starting to see that.
Yeah, thanks. No, absolutely, Brian. It's fantastic comments. And one thing, I know we're going to run out of time here shortly, but we do have the Meet the Speaker panels after this, so we can cover any questions that we did not get from the audience overall. But in the last couple of minutes here, I just ask, maybe I'll start with you, Anthony, around, if we think about this sounds like a complex problem, right? How do we monitor comprehensively all these different metrics about the model? How do we entail across, what does that entail across all the different platforms, internal, external, embedded, et cetera? So as you think about, is this an area where tooling can help, right? Is this an area where we can see that supporting the various functions to provide that comprehensive monitoring?
Yeah, Dave, absolutely. And what we have to all realize is that when you talk about AI machine learning, these models are huge consumers of data. So you need to build, you need to generate, you got to kind of pivot from a carburetor fuel injection to make these models do what they're supposed to do. I mean, and I think, like, coming from financial services, it's, Facebook, Google, these types of companies have kind of educated, I think, my constituency on the value of data. So I think there needs to be a commitment and a belief in the analytics and a culture that not only the analytics can make a difference, but you're also got the governance and risk factor, which financial services companies are really good at. So knowing that, I think, really paying attention to the logistics, the plumbing of getting data into models, as well as being able to monitor them on a real-time basis, I think is something you need to think through, and whether use the technology that's out there, or certainly architect that technology so you can do that. I think, along the lines of, like, thinking about car manufacturing, you're going to build these high horsepower type tools. You need to think about anti-lock brakes. You need to think about tires, and it needs to go kind of hand in hand with it. And I think the technology exists there, and it grows every day and improves every day. So there's no reason why I think you cannot build this sort of infrastructure around these types of models. And the process of learning is just value creation in my mind. So, if it's done correct, there's really no excuse, I think, if you're committed to believing analytics can improve and create shareholder value for you. The technology's there. It's just a commitment. I will say resources are tight, and we're coming out of a crisis where a lot of, at least financial services companies, might be hamstrung from a budget perspective. But if you want to kind of get in this and make a difference, I do believe analytics does make a difference. I was talking to one of the largest mortgage REITs this week, a board member, and they're using AI to buy loans on a flow basis from various, they're an aggregator from smaller banks, and they believe AI has added 50, 60 basis points to their bottom line. And so, I think in order to, if it's that kind of conviction, commitment, I think John's comment also is very important. I think to do this correctly, it needs to be a team effort. One of the biggest things I've seen in banking model development, the biggest problem I've seen, and you saw this in CCAR, is you leave the statisticians, the data scientists, the econometricians up to their own devices, and they build these nice statistical models, but they are lacking that business acumen. So you need to really merge those two, and even in the review process, it needs to be a village. You need to have effective challenge, because these things are very dynamic. They change, and as we pointed out, just the way models are built, they're always trying to catch up to new trends, right? So bringing in all those kind of dynamic viewpoints is critical to managing this, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony. And we're about to run out of time, so I really appreciate all the comments. We didn't get to every question that was coming from the panel, but we do have that Meet the Speaker after, which we can dive into some of those questions overall. But I want to thank you to all the panelists today. As you heard from everybody, model monitoring is something that needs to be addressed now. And as part of an overall effort with AI being a board level initiative, that's something where monitoring is part of a ModelOps program. is an area that we would highly recommend that executives consider for investment going forward. So thank you so much to the panelists, and we look forward to meeting you in the speaker meet and greet.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you,
you. Yeah.
everyone. And thank you, Dave, for leading that conversation forward. Now, there are lots of questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, not just in this session, but the event overall. You guys have been one of the most interactive audiences we have ever had. So the good news is we will now be heading straight into our Meet the Speakers, which is taking place in another session. So you're going to pop out the one you're watching now, and you're going to pop into that, and it will be face-to-face over Zoom. So you feel free to ask additional questions. Obviously, we'll cover the ones that we didn't quite get chance to answer today. Now, that leaves me to say a huge big thank you to everyone who has joined us today. All of the content will be available on demand in the coming days. It will live just in this platform. And we also have a wealth of additional content and resources available in the resource tab. Obviously, I've mentioned it several times today, as have the other speakers. We do have our new report, which just launched today, so I strongly recommend you dive in and read all about it there. But now we will be heading into the speaker meet and greet. Please do head into that session. You'll be asked to join one of the breakout sessions, which is correlates to one of the sessions. So I look forward to seeing you there.